Welcome to Post-Tsunami, where we talk about our experiences with the tsunami of sound, where we are in life, and sort of our thoughts on the future for our lives. And I'm here with Eduardo. Hey, what's up, Eduardo?
Hi, Duke. Oh my
Hey.
God. It's been quite some time.
Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, we didn't really talk, I feel like, when we were in band, but it's
Uh,
nice to
we,
see.
yeah, we're at some of the same events. Yeah, I remember you were a very introspective young man,
Yeah.
when we were both, in high school. But I'm glad that's changed, obviously, now, since you're, doing these like long form, chats with some of
Yes.
the, alumni.
Yeah. It's just a random idea that I've had. For me, there's a lot of ideas that kind of randomly float in my head, but a lot of the
Mhm.
times I don't act on it. And considering COVID, this is the perfect time to act on stuff like this. Um,
Right, absolutely.
so and it's always nice to see where people are with with their lives too.
The episodes have been great, because, kind of getting to follow, what a lot of, um now, granted, they are sort of centered around your,
Yes.
people who were sort of closer to your graduating class, but,
Yeah,
it's like, yeah.
I tried hard to, reach out to other people because yeah, it's been
Mhm.
around my class, either my class or the year after. But I'm really trying to get older people on as well. So it's nice that you're the first like older person on the show.
Yes, the aged,
Yeah.
wisdom I will bring to this episode, is going to be enhanced by this nice rosé I'm having
Yeah, there we
to,
go.
keep me honest and make
Yeah.
this a little more, interesting.
Uh-huh.
Um, I do not need alcohol to get me going first thing in the morning, so that's how I know I don't have a problem.
Cool.
But hey, that'll make this, all the more fun.
Yeah. For the people who don't know who you are, go ahead and introduce yourself. Um
Sure. I'll go through this outline that you so graciously provided that I haven't
Yes.
looked at,
Yes.
to again keep this honest, to some degree or another. My name is, Eduardo Victoria. I said that with an accent.
Here we go.
And yeah, I graduated in the class of 2010. It's crazy to think that, this June that'll have been 11 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in band all 4 years of high school. So from when I entered, I believe in the fall of 2006, all the way through
Yep.
graduation in 2010. Instruments, oh god. Played
Yeah, you played a
everything.
lot. Yeah, you played a lot, I
Yeah.
remember.
Well, I kind of was like, into experimenting, as I
Yeah.
still am. And, I primarily, I was a saxophone player.
Mhm.
Woodwinds really was what I focused on.
Yep.
Dabbled in, like, horn, early on, I believe before your time, I think freshman year, I, like, dabbled in horn,
Okay.
and then I
Yeah.
decided I wanted to get more serious in, kind of woodwinds because I wanted to do that as a potential career. Um, Describe high school bandy self. I was very intense in, I think, all the wrong ways.
Uh-huh.
Sort of like all the energies, thinking back on it, it's like, all the energies were focused in some areas that were, rightly focused on.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
yeah.
then also a lot, maybe more kind of in the social aspects were not. In terms, I was like
I see.
intense, and I think like looking back on it, I was like, intense and maybe,
Mhm.
um yeah. Well, looking back on it, it's kind of like I don't regret,
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't regret a lot of it,
yeah.
it's like, basically kind of like that intensity for music kind of was all, at the end of the day, that was sort of the driving force of all of
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah, and, I always appreciated that because I feel like current day band has sorta lost that intensity, um, with sort of keeping up with that musicianship standard of, hey, this is how we should sound. I feel like
Mhm.
that's been lost over the years since I every now and then I like to talk to Terrell and check out the band and see how they're doing, and they definitely
Yeah,
lost
he
some of
he
that.
and I yeah, he and I keep in touch. We actually have done a couple of like quartet gigs and
Uh-huh.
duet stuff like
Yeah, yeah.
post high school. And I've kind of like thought about flirted with the idea of
Mhm,
asking him, "Oh, could I write something for, the band
mhm,
maybe?" But then I also think to myself in the music that I'm writing now, and a lot of it is leaning more towards kind of um out there sort of ways of writing, and
uh-huh.
thinking like, would they really be into that and would they care? Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I could give 1,000% and they'll be like, I'm just here to make it until like the next period because this is like an easy one, which is not, me trying to discount, the
Yeah, yeah.
current band members in any way. Like clearly
Right.
they're taking the classes because they enjoy it. But
Mhm,
I personally, it's like, um, if I'm gonna take the time to write a piece and put a lot of effort into it, I also would like something back. The rehearsal's fun or
yeah.
make them interested in the music. But that whole kind of musicianship thing is like a whole philosophical discussion that
Mhm.
maybe we'll get into when we talk present day. But
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. Because I feel like with you, Julian, and Vince, I think you guys kept a pretty intense like standard. That's at least what I felt, from you guys. Like, oh, this is what, we should aspire to be, this is the standard that we have to
Well,
meet.
just from knowing Julian and Vince, and this would also go for a couple of the other of my fellow bandmates at that time.
Mhm.
They were just great academics. They
Yes.
are great academics. They are, to this day, great people. Julian, Vince, Samantha Plethe, just absolutely incredible people that I still just greatly, greatly admire. And I always admired
Mhm.
that in addition to being really competent and good musicians, they were also just great students because I was
Mhm.
not a great student in high school. Um, so yeah, it was so hard to go to band and like care for something so much. And then, I had a couple other classes that had great, great, great teachers,
Mhm.
some of whom I still talk to today. Um, and then, I'd have to go to like some French class. And it's like, that's not me,
Yeah.
man. That's just
Yeah.
which is ironic because, we deal with a lot of like French terminology and composition.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, French, Italian, German. Um, but so and that was my admiration. That was kind of like the great admiration that I had for them was like, wow, if I could be um, a quarter of sort of the academics or the
Mhm.
students or just kind of the great people that whom you mentioned, Vince, Sam, Julian, um and kind of going further out to that greater circle of friends,
Mhm.
even like going further back pre your class,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Javi,
Mhm.
who I still talk to, saw him last weekend briefly when I
Oh,
dropped
cool.
some stuff off at his place. Javiera Garibay, who has gone on to have a great career as a library, as a library scientist
Oh, okay.
uh, at USC.
Uh-huh.
Helping preserve a lot of old like folklorico videos, sort of important to the history of the art form and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, because again, I was not much of a student, but I excelled at BS show business arts, um,
Yeah, yeah.
and movie trivia. So
Uh-huh.
you know, it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's okay, school wasn't for everyone.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
which is another thing that I sort of learned post CIHS, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I'll save that for when we get to the pertinent years for
Okay,
that discussion.
cool. Yeah. Let's jump in the past a little bit. I got a little bit of beef with you. No, not really, but it's something that came to mind for me. There was you remember in, I think it was my freshman year. Band was third period, right? Terrell had this collection of like sheet protectors with like it was the Rhythm Master, and it had just a bunch of rhythms. Um and they were all blocked in a
I
measure.
remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
you remember
remember that.
that?
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
he would pick a random rhythm, and he would just pick someone randomly in the band, like, hey, like what's the rhythm for this? And he would have that person clap it out. So there was one time where it was my turn to like Terrell pick me, like, all right, so here's the rhythm. I forgot what the rhythm was. It was a bunch of eighth notes and 16th notes. It was a little bit more complicated. Um, but I tried to clap it out, and then I think I was in the back and you were singing in the front, and when I finished clapping it out, you were like out loud, "What the hell?" I don't know if you remember this, but
Oh,
oh, where's the video? Okay,
oh, we dropped out. We dropped out for a second there.
that's
Oh,
okay.
there we
No,
go.
you're back. You're back.
Great.
um,
Yeah. What are
but
you
yeah,
gonna do?
yeah, yeah. You were like,
Uh-huh.
"What the hell?" And it was like in such a condescending tone. And at the time,
Uh-huh.
I didn't think much about it, because in my mind, I was like, that's Eduardo being Eduardo. He's more musically inclined than myself. Like whatever.
Uh-huh.
But then my sister brought it up, um, and she said, "Dude, you know what? Eduardo's comment, that's kind of like a dick thing to do." And yeah, at the time I didn't think much of it, but then I was like, was that a dick thing to do? Like,
Hmm.
I
Yes,
feel like in
yes,
my mind, it wasn't. But
absolutely, absolutely, it is a dick thing to do. And I had horrors inflicted upon me
yeah,
by other music-minded people that are
yeah,
far beyond horror that.
right, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
so just to put it into perspective, it's like I could definitely feel what that would have been. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
again, that kind of like intensity that I had. First off, Duke, I sincerely apologize
No, that's
for that
okay.
if
That's
I
okay.
made you feel uh like you weren't up to snuff, which I remember at Ventura College we
Mhm.
would do like ear training exercises, and then our
Yeah.
professor was like, let's do that one more time, but this time with talent. Um
Just dragging
yeah,
everyone, just
which was,
telling everyone they're
a
bad.
great. Oh yeah, my favorite would be when he would just get frustrated
Mhm.
and he would just slam the book closed and say, why don't we meet again when you all actually do your work? And he would just walk
Yeah.
out like 10 minutes into the class. But Terrell never did that.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, again, it was just kind of like that intensity centered in probably like the wrong social aspects of it.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, you know, instead of just thinking to myself, make a note of that and go help Duke with it out
Mhm.
later, it's just
Yeah,
more kind
yeah.
of like, let me just let you know how wrong you are
Yeah, yeah,
immediately
yeah.
in front
Yeah, yeah.
of everybody.
In front of everyone, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that really set the tone for me, like, "Oh, this is what I'm dealing with." Like, "Alright."
That
Um,
was yeah, but oh yeah, yeah, that's and that's such an interesting, I think, kind of like rehearsal thing.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I'm not trying to, like, blame you, but
mhm.
that's the sort of, like, "Oh, this is the standard that I have to meet." Like, I have to go up there versus, like, everyone else, sort of being
So
explanatory.
this is like a weird physical abuse question for
Mhm.
you,
Yeah.
or kind of a mental emotional abuse.
Yeah.
But in the end, do you feel like that comment was helpful?
I would say yes and no. It comes off kind of jerkish,
It is
but
incredibly jerkish, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
of me to have said that.
Yeah, but it's a jerkish way of saying, like, basically get good, or like you need to. I mean, you could say that in a more constructive way, but it's I would say yes and
Mhm.
no. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and and I got nothing to say to that other than like, yeah,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, of course, that does sound like me and
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I did, whatever at that time. which is funny because like only a couple of years later, when I like dove in headfirst, it was like,
Mhm.
oh, you have no idea like how creative people are going to get with their ways that they critique your playing,
Mhm.
musicianship,
Yeah.
whatever. That actually does remind me of something that happened to me with that happened to me when I did the LA Jazz Society
Uh-huh.
mentorship, the Bill Green mentorship a couple years later. But we'll get to that, I guess.
Okay.
That'll be the post years. But
Okay.
anyways, Duke, I sincerely apologize that
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I hurt your feelings for that. But I'm glad it made you a better musician.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think definitely when you guys left, you guys as in class of 2010, I tried to keep that musicianship along, and I think like retrospectively, I think I did a fairly good job of that. Um,
And did you
I
find
was
that did you find trying to maintain that level of musicianship, did you find that it was um difficult, or kind of like a sort of happy medium? Um like were people willing to go along and they were like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do the practice, I'll do whatever the
yeah,
work that I have to, or did you find that it was like um
like me
that
dragging people's feet.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think people in my band years, after 2010, they were fairly receptive of me. Like they knew the goal that I was trying to aim for. And for me, drum major for me as a job, it was like, okay, I just want the band to sound as good as possible. That was my one goal.
sure.
Um, right? And I had to implement some new things after you guys left. But yeah, I think the band was fairly receptive. I was like, I think I was strict, but I was also fair.
Okay.
So I feel like I wasn't too over the top, like in retrospect, but I don't know, maybe other people in the past would say otherwise.
Hmm.
um I mean, I'm gonna be biased because it's my point of view, but
Right.
yeah, I think generally people were receptive of my goal and they respected that. Of course, there were some outliers where, they were just there for the credits or to get out of PE and that sort of thing. And,
Right.
you
For
can't
the
really do much for those people, but for the most part, everyone was like pretty dedicated. Um,
All right, so I'm gonna move on to I'm gonna kind of
mhm.
jump around here
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
past section because I have some stuff kind of pertaining to that.
Yeah, yeah.
It says favorite year in band. So definitely my favorite year was my senior year. Um, and that's funny that you mentioned that, some people just can't be helped. I don't know if any future, I'm going to drop some nuggets of knowledge
Yeah.
along the way, as we get on, as we kind of go along this thing. And one of these things is that maybe like if any kind of the younger band members are going to watch this, or
I
anybody
hope so,
else,
yeah.
yeah, or because it's like stuff that I've learned along the way, because I
Mhm.
frequently have gone back and told myself, I wish I would have known this, I wish I would have
Yeah,
done that.
exactly.
And one of those things is that some people just can't be helped, and that's okay. Like, it's not your responsibility to
Yeah.
do so ultimately. And one of those things, like you mentioned, was that some people are doing it like, just because it's fun. Some people are doing it just to get out of PE, or the kind of the camaraderie that comes out of it.
Yeah.
Because it's basically kind of like the closest comparison that I could have to, kind of like if you're a musician, is
Mhm.
pretty much like playing a team sport.
Yeah.
You have to train, you have to play well in a team, you have to
Mhm.
know your role in that team, and then you have to kind of look at your own sort of team standards. And I think the first time that really kind of like occurred to me, where it's like it's not all about you,
Mhm.
and was probably my senior year of high school, in
Yeah.
trying to work in a section, because I remember the section that year was the saxophone section was pretty good. We had Sergio
Yeah.
Hernandez, we had Reynard,
Mhm.
um, Cam Solis.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Karen Solis is like younger. Karen Solis, her older sister, was in my graduating class,
Mhm.
and she was like in a bunch of my classes. And it was like a really good section. And then kind of going further beyond the
Yeah.
altos, we had like Lawrence Ann,
Right.
um, it was like a pretty solid section of people. Like it was the right combination of people who like took it seriously and also were like just interested enough. And then
Yeah,
at
yeah,
some
yeah.
point, I had to just kind of realize that like not everyone here is like going 100%. And that really kind of started, I think, my senior year when I began to realize that, and then also building on my junior year, which I think would have been your freshman year,
Yes, yes, yeah,
2009.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the band, as has been discussed here in the past, the band got relatively small, and
Yeah, so I was like, for me, when my freshman year, I legit thought the band was gonna die because the band was so small. My class, it was just me and Zandro. There were the two of us, and other people would come along and join.
Mhm.
But we weren't big enough to, sustain a band by ourselves, and that freaked me out.
And that is like a tricky thing for like a high school group, because part of I
Yeah.
think that high school method of playing is that you can basically kind of dissolve into one greater, and this would be the same of playing
Mhm.
in like big groups. Like the biggest group I've ever played in was the Ventura County high school honor band, and that thing was like easily either just about 100 people or like well over 100 people.
Dang. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's interesting playing in groups that big because you are kind of a cog in a
In
greater
a wheel,
machine.
right?
And you could just sort of blend, and you have to blend with everybody, because you're playing in a section and you're
Hmm.
important as everyone else, but um ultimately that section sound is important, and you want
Yeah.
to play as a section, and ultimately the section wants to play as a band, or within their role in the band, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
And in our junior year we couldn't really have that. Everyone was
Yeah.
exposed because we were so
Yeah.
small,
Right.
which
Yeah.
I, again, like having learned that at Ventura College, when I would eventually go into Ventura College and
Mhm.
do chamber music, where it's literally like a piano, maybe one other instrument or something like
Yeah.
that. um and it's a lot more exposed, and at that point you can't hide.
Yeah. Yep.
So part of it was that kind of desire that we're so exposed and we just want to be as good as possible.
Mhm.
And I think our junior year we did that Riverside marching competition, my junior year.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and I think we placed third. And I was,
Uh-huh.
again, this was like, I kind of jokingly, and my girlfriend Stacy,
Mhm.
who you will see walking around because we live in an apartment in
Mhm.
LA, which is small because that's LA life. Um, I kind of, she's like, will tell me not to say this, but I will frequently mention, oh yeah, it's just because I'm an asshole. Can I curse on this?
Yeah, 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 go for it.
Fucking fantastic. Anyway, I'll just say like, oh, that just goes back to me being an asshole. And anyway, so I guess, which I would totally was to you, which I don't even remember. There you go, still am.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to it, when we placed third in that marching competition, I thought, wow, no shit. Like, how'd that happen? But again, I think ultimately everybody, though, the level of musicianship was at several different what's the word? Everyone kind of treated it to a different level of seriousness.
Right, yeah.
Ultimately, everyone treated it with enough kind of respect that that we were able to sort of pull off this really great thing, which is that we were able
Yeah.
to place third against bigger bands who,
Yeah.
again, you can kind of dissolve, and it's much easier to hide in that environment. And then that all kind of went away. My senior year, when the
Oh,
band
man, yeah. Class of
like
13.
tripled in size. But
Like,
because the band
yeah.
tripled in size, it's like now we have sections that are choirs, and we can do
Yeah.
some like genuinely interesting things with it. And I think that made my senior year musically like really, really fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then just kind of personally, I that year I became really close with David Cole,
Mhm.
who's a history teacher at Channel Islands High School.
Yeah,
Um,
I used to sleep in his class after I
yeah.
get all my work done. He would legit just let me sleep. I would all those AP classes and bands, I would go to sleep fairly late, and so I would just be tired at school. And Mr. Cole, he would just let me sleep after I did all my assignments. I was like, great, you know, Mr. Cole is like super reasonable. Like he was like, hey, you did all of his work, you know, you can do whatever.
Yeah, your share of the work is done. You've shown that you have a comprehension for the material. Like, as far as
Yep.
I'm concerned, he did his job, and he did it
Yep.
well enough to where, you know, so many teachers are like at that level were so intense. I won't name names,
Oh yeah.
but like
I think I know what you're
unnecessarily
talking
so.
about. I think I know who you're talking about.
And but Cole was amazing because you could tell that he had been doing this for so long that he knows that, you know, ultimately, again, you just can't help some people,
Mhm.
but he gave you the keys to succeed.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
genuinely gave you the keys to succeed. And it's like all the stuff was that you needed from him was in his lecture, it was in the
Mhm.
book, whatever handouts he would give us. And again, if that comprehension was there, like, I don't see why he should continue to kind of like ride your ass like other teachers hope they
Right.
have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and Mr. Cole was great because I feel so weird calling these people by their first name still. And John Grennan was another one because, like, I
Mhm.
think senior year I was the editor of the Iowa which was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
high school newspaper, and also just kind of like on a personal level, my father passed away my senior year. My
Oh.
dad he was only 59. You know, he was like in
Mhm.
decline. He had a heart attack in 2001. I think it was like in third grade,
Uh-huh.
and his health just kind of like steadily declined from there. Um, and you know, just thinking back on it, like he
Mhm.
never, you know, he didn't get to see me graduate. He never got to see me do honor band, which was like kind of insane. Up to that point that I, you know, could even think that I could get into, you know, a group of that level. Cause at that point it was like, oh
Mhm.
my God, these are some of the greatest musicians I've like ever played with. Um, and you know, that year was just kind of like the jumping off point to where I thought, okay, I like want to do something, you know, musical with my life.
Yeah.
So those just kind of like in addition to all the friendships that I made. And
Mhm.
in particular, I remember Brian Mares had come over from Wainimi High School. He had done his
Yeah.
freshman through junior year at Wainimi High School, which was like CI's sister school. And Brian and I like literally grew up like one street over from each other,
Uh-huh.
and we'd known each other since like single digit age. So we
Mhm.
were like, like brothers basically.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, oh my God, Brian is going to be in the band with us for our senior year.
Yeah, that must've been super
Uh,
exciting. I didn't know
it was
that.
it was incredibly exciting,
Yeah.
and you know, it was just great to have him around. And in addition to that, you know, in the intervening years, I'd grown so close with Sergio that, you know, he and I, like to this day still talk
Mhm.
frequently, and well, like, not as much as we should, but
Well, yeah,
life.
this
But
adulting, yeah, happens.
yeah, but anyway, yeah, and so like to have Sergio, you know, on one side, Brian on the other, it was like this weird friendship sandwich that was just like incredible. And that's what made my senior year in band memorable, was just these kind of like really high highs and these really like low lows.
Mhm.
Um, and it was incredible. It was great. Um, and I remember that year too. I wanted to coast. Like, I thought, I don't want to do
Uh-huh.
any real work this
Yeah,
year.
yeah, yeah.
Like, you know, socially,
Academically?
academically, like so socially leading up to my senior year, you
Mhm.
know, typical high school angsty bullshit. Nobody
Mhm.
understands me,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and then my senior year, I thought I just want to coast. I don't want to work hard in any of my classes. I just want to take stuff that's going to be easy. So I like dropped math
Uh-huh.
because that was like my biggest to this day, like not good at math. And that was my biggest challenge, and that was so hard.
Uh-huh.
And that was when I had some administrators from Channel Islands tell me, "You're never going to go anywhere in life.
Uh-huh.
Like, if you
Yeah.
want to, if you're going to study music, you will fail because that will get you nowhere."
Yeah.
I won't name names, but I know that
Yeah.
neither of them work at CI any longer.
I see. Yeah, as a counselor, you would think that, it's your job to be encouraging, but I know not everyone's
Yeah,
like that.
and and again, hey, you bring your life experiences to it, and so your
Hmm.
life experience tells you that if you choose to study this, your options for any sort of career aren't going to be as viable as if you do something else. Whatever, that's them. If their life experiences chose to make them an asshole, and so be it. And that's
Yep.
something that I eventually came to terms with, even though I am still bitter about it. But it also makes the highs very satisfying, particularly
Oh
last
yeah.
year before the pandemic,
Hmm.
which we'll talk about that commercial later, because
Hmm.
that was a moment for me.
Yeah, yeah. Like you really want to prove people wrong, and that's so satisfying when you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so definitely my senior year was hands down like my favorite year in band.
Hmm.
It's just, we had a big group, a lot of really great, like, new young faces, Andrew, Angel Aragon, Reynard, Lawrence.
Hmm.
Like, please forgive me if I'm like forgetting anyone else.
That's okay. Yeah, yeah.
But that was just absolutely fantastic. I look back on it and definitely kind of like, I look back on it nostalgically. Not,
Hmm.
I'm not one of those people who wishes they could be back in high school because that were
Hmm.
their, those were their glory days. Like, ironically enough,
Yeah.
I'm like in better physical shape now than I was in high school.
Oh, awesome. There you
Now
go.
that I'm like 10 years older.
Yeah, yeah.
But but I look back on it
Hmm.
like, fondly with like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of nostalgia.
Hmm. How does your senior year compare to all of your other years? Was your senior year up here and then everything else was just bleh? Or was it like relatively close?
I would say yes. It's definitely like heads and tails above everything else except for maybe like my freshman year.
Uh-huh.
Freshman, I like, again, the one thing that I could kind of think back on to the earlier years were, I had Sergio was with me all of those
Yep.
4 years, and he still is today, and I absolutely like love him to death for doing it,
Mhm.
and for having to put up with my BS for so long. And but I had other people sort of along the way. The big highlights were that to this day, right, Javi
Mhm.
and Samantha Lopez, who was the drum major my freshman and sophomore years, and
Yep.
I've become really really good friends with Samantha, like knowing her family and still keeping in touch with her today.
Mhm.
And that was kind of the highlight. Like, if I look back on those earlier years, it's like those were kind of the great highlights for me, were the friendships that I made with like Samantha,
Yeah.
or your sister Vanessa, Rocky, Javi, like, all these great people. Um and kind of as the musicianship grew, um that sort of begun, or that sort of had begun to be replaced by the time I got to my senior year. So by the time I got to my senior year,
Yeah.
it was like, I'm so music focused that's kind
Mhm.
of like, the first thing. Whereas the prior years, it was more like a social thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I still remember my first football game, and I love my family a lot, but they definitely, I was so they tried to keep me a sheltered child,
Yeah.
which is hilarious because they like would let me watch, my sisters would let me watch these like horror movies and things, where it's like, how could you let me watch this stuff and not think that I'm like not going to turn out the way I'm going to turn out?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which is why I point to that Predator Madball there in the
There we
corner
go.
as my continued obsession with these things, but because of they let me watch that stuff. But
Yeah.
anyway, but it was kind of the whole thing to them of like extracurriculars and getting to go out or whatever. That all was necessary when I joined band, obviously, because we had to play at the football games, which were in the evenings. And I still remember the first one thinking, this is a school related thing. It's a school sanctioned thing,
Yep.
but I'm with a bunch of my friends
Mhm.
and we have some downtime. And I had never really experienced that before. And I think I was
Uh-huh.
like 13, 14 years old when this was
Uh-huh.
happening. So this was like mind expanding, man. This was literally like literally blowing my mind thinking, kind of the beginnings of like, I guess, like real social relationships. Again, we were
Right,
playing in
right.
band and like ultimately, we were there to do a job. Um, but that was again, so I guess the social aspects were the highlight of the earlier years. And my
Mhm,
senior year, I guess, still kind of stands head and shoulders above it. But sort of discovering the social aspects of band, both good and bad,
mhm.
were the highlight of the first 3 years, before I got to my senior year.
Nice. Did you have any memories that stick out, whether it's from your senior year or from your freshman year?
Um, I love all the time, sort of, with Patty personally,
Mhm.
because she was like kind of like my great friend that I like leaned on. Who happy that over the pandemic we've like been able to talk a little more.
Yeah.
Sort of getting back in touch. So kind of that whole year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Patty was great because she was one of the few people that I could just talk to about anything, and we can always hold a conversation just
And
with anything. Yeah.
she would just like, listen and non-judgmentally
Yeah.
listen. And that was great, sort of, that fostering friendship with her.
Yeah.
And probably like getting to do honor band.
Mhm.
Because I guess that was like great for my ego to show, I guess, like, well, first off, I don't know, prior to myself,
Mhm.
I don't know when the last time someone from Channel Islands had done the honor band.
Yeah, I will
Um,
tell you that someone who plays, I think he plays Barry Sax, but someone made it into honor band recently, maybe
oh,
within the last year or
fantastic.
two. So yeah, they're
Fantastic.
in terms of music, I would say they're fairly inclined. Um, and so he was one of the few people that stuck out to me, looking at all of the high school students. Like his musicianship was like up here and everyone else is down here. Not to like talk crap about everyone else, but he was he was just on another level.
Yeah, he
So
treat he treated it differently.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
That was like a great moment. Um, but that to me was probably the highlight because that was sort of the
Mhm.
real. Um, the one thing I would say about the band was that it was definitely its own version of reality. It kind of prepared
Yeah,
me a lot in terms of like the team building aspects, but in terms of like the music, this is not meant to be any sort of like put down on the other band members or like
yeah.
Terrell or whatever. But when I left high school band and I went, well, first I took a couple of classes at Oxnard College, and
Mhm.
then I jumped over to Ventura College.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a shock.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, I am horrible compared
Yeah.
to some other people that are my age and younger. I have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, that's how I
and
felt being in college bands, being surrounded by 200 other musicians that came from various walks
Mhm.
of life and various other bands that had different standards. I was just shocked with just the unspoken standard, I guess, of college bands. And I felt like I couldn't meet that to a certain extent, but I knew that I could
you
work
know,
myself towards, getting to that point.
right, if you're willing to do the work,
Yeah.
and you know what you need to work on, you can improve significantly fairly quickly. You just have to
Mhm.
be committed to doing the work. But it plays into a greater kind of like something that I think I alluded to at the beginning
Mhm.
was there is definitely a mentality toward the arts in
Mhm.
the part of Ventura County that we lived in.
Yes.
Um, we never had the budget to do a lot of parades. We only did a couple, like at
Yeah.
most we would do what, like two or three a year.
Yeah.
When we did the marching band half of the year. We like, we didn't have a huge budget. Um,
Yeah, we
and
had to get fairly
overall,
creative.
we had to get
Yeah.
creative. And I remember when I wanted to start taking saxophone lessons post high school.
Mhm.
And I remember my parents or my sister and my mom thinking like, "You want to take lessons? Like, right, you can already play." And I was like, "Yeah, but I have a lot to learn, and
Yeah.
there's always a lot to learn." And that's probably one of the greatest lessons that's been bestowed upon me is that no matter how skilled you get or how old you get, there's always something to learn.
Yeah, yeah. It's
And so
yeah.
I wanted to take lessons, and they were like, "This is oh, okay, sure, whatever. Find a teacher, and we'll go from there." And that's such an Oxnard thing where it's like, why would you want to take lessons on an instrument? Like, can't
Uh-huh.
you already play it? And I had that experience recently where I was trying to get
Yeah.
a music theory student who I was kind
Mhm.
of like, we were doing email tag, and he wanted to take music theory lessons because friend had me saying like, "Hey, I think this kid like has something." And like I think there's something there in his writing. You should look at it. And it's all like he was doing arrangements of like stuff by from Star Wars, and it's all
Mhm.
by John Williams. So this person knew me and thought he's the John Williams guy. And anyway, I got in touch with this student, and then when it came to their parents, they were like, "You know what? I don't want to do this. I don't want to pay for
Yeah.
this."
Mhm.
Which I wasn't going to do it for free because I had to treat this with some level of respect and treat it as like a
Yeah, yeah.
career.
Yeah, yeah, it's your time.
And it's my time or
Yeah.
whatever. But then at the end, they were like, "You know what? I just want to do this as a hobby." And I thought,
Mhm.
okay, you never told me that earlier, but that's just a very Oxnard thing, is that the
Yeah.
arts are kind of treated as this as a secondary as this kind of secondary element to everything else. The
Yeah.
arts are entertainment,
Mhm.
which I can tell you that through my earlier years in high school, had it not been for like the records that I listened
Mhm.
to and kind of being able to play the saxophone in the way that I did, socially, I probably would have turned to like drugs or I don't know what the hell else to kind of cope
Yeah,
with it.
yeah. Yeah, that would come up in band boosters a lot. They would the parents would be like, "This is a great organization for the kids to be a part of because they get to be a part of something greater than themselves, and that gives them a sense of what's the word? I don't know, like community or belongingness, something along those lines."
It's a sense of
Um,
community. It's a sense of kind of like getting to know who you are or
yeah.
kind of discover that. And I feel like for me, I didn't really get to do a lot of that until my post high school years.
Mhm.
Um, but very much in high school, those are sort of like the beginnings of getting to know who you are, and who you
Yeah.
will be is going to change a lot in those 4 years and
Mhm.
in the years following. But that beginning is really, really important. So just from that personal experience, I knew that I was never going to be able to like hold down a desk job or any kind of like, kind of 9 to 5 day to day
Right.
thing that
Yeah,
wasn't going
yeah.
to involve something musical, which is, still that pursuit to this day.
Mhm.
Looking back, from when I first entered high school in 2006 to when I began to realize that this was what I wanted to do with my life. Um, but that's like an Oxnard thing. Is
Yeah.
is I guess my point is the whole kind
Yeah.
of secondary treatment of the arts, and like this is a hobby, and you could be really, really good at it, but that's it. It's a hobby.
Yeah. Yeah,
And so that
that might be it because it's not a clear-cut path, I feel like. The art, like it's like a path that you have to
it's
create on your own. I don't know. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say.
every at in my time out here in LA,
Mhm.
trying to cut my teeth as a composer for media and trying to get
Mhm.
my foot in the door. The one question that I love to ask everybody, that is not, even if they're not a musician, like if
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
I've worked with quite a few like incredible directors, some directors who held other jobs or editors or cinematographers, whatever. And the question that I love to ask everybody that's in the business is, how did you get into the business? Because
Yeah.
everybody's answer is day and night different from each other.
Yeah.
And when you pursue the creative arts, that's the experience.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
due to
yeah.
the era that we live in now, it's like everyone how everyone gets in is going to be vastly different from each other. So
Hmm.
their advice may not be able to apply to you,
Yeah.
kind of like lock and key. It might not be able to be the perfect fit, but I think nonetheless, there's still a lot to take away from, getting those stories. And also in band, I learned another great skill, which is if anyone
Hmm.
is thinking of going into a career in the arts, is because I was a film score freak, and that was,
Hmm.
I knew at some point that I wanted to do I wanted to at the time, I wanted to play on film scores. Like, I wanted to be a session musician,
Yeah, yeah.
and eventually it transitioned into I want to write film scores.
Hmm.
Um, but at the time I learned, like, I need to know because looking at the band and looking
Hmm.
at the parts and seeing how, I mentioned earlier, the sections are divided into choirs, and so you have, like, alto saxophone 1,
Hmm.
alto saxophone 2, or clarinet 1, clarinet 2, is I began to look at the soundtrack albums that I was listening to
Hmm.
and paying attention to those sections and who played in those sections, and that became that kind of obsession with who was playing on what and listening to how those sections sounded on, soundtracks became incredibly key to when I started coming out to LA and I started sneaking into John Williams rehearsals at the Hollywood Bowl, because
Uh-huh.
I would walk into those places and be like, that's David Howard on bass clarinet.
Hmm.
That is Michelle Zukovsky on first clarinet.
Hmm.
That is I can't think of her name. That is Sarah Jackson on piccolo and third flute.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, that's Dan Higgins is the alto saxophone soloist. And oh, look, they hired more bass players, and Mike Valerio is one of those bass players.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like if you want to get into the arts, get to know names, get to know who people are, and that became incredibly useful sort of in the years following high school.
Hmm.
Um, and sort of getting to know, people, because that's another thing is that the entertainment business is a people business, and
Yeah.
you got to know how to work people if you want to be able to like work your own career.
Right.
So yeah.
Cool. I think that transitions pretty well into the present. So, can you go into more detail about, what you're doing right now?
Sure. Well, I moved to Los Angeles in 2015, in November of
Mhm.
2015, and it happened by just kind of like a series of, and that's one of those things where I'm not a religious person.
Mhm.
I believe in some sort of a higher power, whether it's like energies guiding us or the force or something. But it was just kind of like an amazing series of
Mhm.
coincidences. So as I mentioned, following high school, I took, kind of leading up to the present. Um, I took a couple classes at Oxnard College, and I befriended the music professor out there, James Kenny, because that department
Mhm.
is pretty much like non-existent. And he, to this day, is like an ally, and a great supporter, and a great wealth of information about anything musical. And a huge Beatles fan. So that was sort of
Mhm.
how we, clicked.
Yeah, yeah.
It was he discovered it, discovered his love of the Beatles. He discovered my love of the Beach Boys. And and then I began taking classes at Ventura College for music, and that was when I decided to do the whole music major program because VC has a great program if you want to study music, and
Mhm.
they're one of the few community colleges in California that actually offered like a private lessons program.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I did that, and eventually, I did that for a couple of years, and I took it seriously, and then I didn't, and then I was like the funny guy in the class because I had so many insecurities,
Mhm.
and that I just, dealt with them with humor because I didn't know how else to do it. Um and then kind of on top of all that, I started going to see John Williams, the Hollywood Bowl, pretty consistently every year.
Mhm.
And then I discovered that security at the bowl used to be really lax.
Yeah.
So one day, um, I had in high school, I had met Dan Higgins, who, an amazing woodwind player, great guy, just incredible human being, and just a great mentor and supporter. And I was looking for him at a rehearsal because the LAFL used to have the Williams rehearsals open to the public during the
Mhm.
day. And I thought I would go over to say hi. So I went around back the stage entrance, and there was like no security around. So I just walked in, No one was telling me anything. Kept
Mhm.
looking for him. Wandered into the green room area. No one told me anything.
Mhm.
Ended up talking with like the concert master of the LA Phil to find him, who's like one of the best violinists in the world. Bing Wong. Couldn't find him. And then I look over into the audience and I see, he's talking to like my mom and my sister.
Wow.
And I'm like on the stage at the Hollywood Bowl. So then I like, do a 180 to exit. And before me is John Williams sitting at the piano, signing a
Mhm.
bunch of papers. And I freeze. Like, what do you say to God
Yeah, yeah.
when he's in front of you? So I don't talk to him and I just kept going because it's like, he doesn't need to hear me.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, so that kind of was like, all right, this is what I want. This is what I want to get to. And doing that at VC, I did that for a couple of years with like, that's the goal. Like, here's what I want out of all of this. And eventually I just got burnt out. Like I got burnt
Mhm.
out. I like, I had to start working obviously because I had to get a job because you have to make money
Mhm.
to support yourself. And eventually the goal was to transfer. And I remember doing a gig because I started performing with with a lot of local groups and kind of just
Mhm.
doing a lot of sort of ringery type work where somebody needed a sax player and my
Yeah.
name got to them eventually. Um, and I did this gig on the Avenue with like a friend of a friend. And he just wanted like a small horn section. It was literally like me and one other woodwind player, and she was a
Mhm.
flute player. And then talking to her and sort of, just kind of in between our work, she told me that she had actually gone to Berklee and dropped out.
Uh-huh.
And, the Berklee School of Music in Boston is like, one of the premier like music schools in the United States. And I thought, why would you get there and then leave?
Yeah.
And she told me something that, to this day, like pretty much has stayed with me to this day, which
Mhm.
was she had this intense love of music. Um, she had this intense love of music and she loved playing the flute and she wanted to do something with it. And then she got to Boston at Berklee, and all everyone else wanted to do was be the best player in that department. Everyone wanted
Mm.
that first chair, everyone wanted that, that soloist, everyone wanted solo. Everyone was just pretty much like interested in competing with each other.
Yeah.
And that was something that I've like never handled well. I've never been competitive. And it again, I was doing all of this because I just loved music and I loved playing the saxophone at the time. And my mind had begun to transition into like writing because I know Terrell and I used to do some like call and response exercises where like
Mhm.
Terrell would play a line on his saxophone and he would ask me to play it back like just
Yeah.
by ear. So that was and I would write like little things for the band here and there. And like little just couple bar, like I don't know if you remember those, just like a few bars,
Yeah, yeah,
like
I remember those. Yeah, when I was talking with Angel during our episode, I didn't really think of soloing as a conversation with the instrument. That's a perspective that I never thought of, and then I thought that was a pretty interesting way to
yeah,
put it.
it's like you have to treat this your instrument if you're going to be serious about this,
Mhm.
like you want to pursue this as a career. Your instrument is an extension of you, and you
Right.
are going to be influenced by other players and things like that. And to me, it's like you have to treat it with this like the utmost respect.
Mhm.
And at that point, I was like more interested in respecting my saxophone than respecting my peers, than respecting even my own family. Um, and one of the hardest things I've ever had to sort of come to terms with was I am not that good at the saxophone.
Uh-huh.
I do, to be honest with you, I was like, I'm okay. I think the thing that finally did it for me, which was like probably the best experience and the nail in the coffin, was I auditioned for the Bill Green mentorship program, which is through
Uh-huh.
the LA Jazz Society. I mentioned that briefly earlier.
Mhm.
Um, and basically, you went down to the Musicians Union building, which used to be on Vine here in LA and Hollywood on Vine Street. And you auditioned, you got placed into. They had an A band and a B jazz
Mhm.
band. Um, and the first year I auditioned, I didn't get in. Second year I auditioned, I did. And literally the first day, somebody came up to me and was like, "Dude, you fucking suck." Like, there's
Wow,
a
really?
reason. There's a the other, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, again, I won't name names, but there's a reason. He's like, there's a reason why you're second chair tenor,
Mhm.
um, and you got a lot of work to do. So keep up. And
Mhm.
right, which was, and he didn't quite do it in front of the entire band,
Yeah.
like I did to you, but he did it in
Yeah.
front of enough people to where I felt pretty burned.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like, I went home, I practiced my, my stuff that I had to work on, and at the end, I had like the directors of the program asking me about who like my influences were, because I guess they just like loved my tenor tone, because I was playing tenor sax in this band, and so that
Mhm.
was like a great, fulfilling thing. Um, but anyway, fast forward through all of this stuff, and all of this is in the back of my mind. And I transitioned into composition at Ventura College, where we learned pretty traditionally. We
Mhm.
learned to compose there by studying sort of like the great kind of literature of chamber music and orchestral music, and you learn to compose with a pencil and paper at a piano,
Yeah.
and then you eventually put it into a notation software, and
Mhm.
you play the thing. Um, And at VC, I, realized I was getting burnt out, I was getting pretty tired. My relationship with my family was deteriorating, to say the least, for one reason or another. And in the intervening years,
Mhm.
I mentioned I was like a huge Beach Boys fan, so I was seeing Brian Wilson kind of like at least once a year at that
Mhm.
point. Pulling together whatever money I could, or whatever sweet talking my sister I had
Yeah.
to get us tickets. But in this case, I like saw Brian Wilson at the Greek in 2015, and Probin Gregory, who's one of the many great multi instrumentalists in his band, snuck me and my friends into the after party. And so we were hanging out at the after party for Brian Wilson at the Greek Theater, and I
Uh-huh.
recognized this like little guy in this crazy flowered shirt with an insane T-shirt on, with like a hat and disheveled hair, and I thought,
Mhm.
"Oh my god, that's Christopher Young." And Chris Young
Mhm.
is a film. He's a composer. He's done a lot. He's known primarily for like his horror work. He did like Hellraiser for Clive
Mhm.
Barker, The Rum Diary. He was doing a lot of heavy hitting studio movies. He did The Core for a while there. Sinister. He most recently did the update on Pet Cemetery. But I was a fan of like his Spider-Man 3 score. I was
Oh,
like, say
yeah,
what you
yeah.
will about the movie, that
Yeah,
score
yeah.
kicks so much ass.
Yeah, dude, I love
And
the
I was
Spider-Man films, the original
dude, I
trilogy.
love Oh my god, Spider-Man 3 is my favorite of that trilogy.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but anyway, so I see Chris, and something that I haven't really mentioned up to this point is like my obsession with movies and how they're made, and
Mhm.
the people who make them, and filmmakers. And part of me at one point was like, maybe I should be a director. But music was always kind of the first love that I
Yeah.
had. And then discovering that there is a place for music within filmmaking. So I saw Chris, and I kept staring at him, and he could tell that I had been like eyeing him the whole night. So he comes over to me and my friends, and he's like, "Hi, I'm Chris."
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh my god, I know who you are. You're Chris Young. You wrote the score for Sam Raimi's The Gift. You did Spider-Man 3. You did The Rum Diary. You did an awesome score for Rounders." And I could tell that he was like a little, I think, like taken aback that anyone had
Yeah.
recognized him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in talking with Chris, he says, I have a house that I rent out to people who want to move to LA to be composers. He's like, you should think
Uh-huh.
about doing it. He's
Yeah,
like, if
yeah.
you're really interested in doing this, like, he's like, if you need any more convincing, here's my phone number. We'll have dinner. Just like, let me know, and we can meet up. And you should do it if this is an
Mhm.
interest that you have. Um, and so that didn't go away. And eventually we did meet up for dinner, and that was kind of like a slap in the face, where Chris was being very realistic, and again, my
Mhm.
relationship at home with my mom and my sister was deteriorating. And at the same time, I met my girlfriend Stacy, because we both had this intense love of the TV show Hannibal.
Mhm.
And so kind of Chris Young and Stacy happening at sort of the same time were what eventually got me to sort of literally like just close a door on my old life
Yeah.
in Oxnard in Ventura County, and then just pick up all my belongings and move out to LA.
Mhm.
Like, I had no idea what I was gonna do. I had no job. I just decided to literally one day, when nobody was home. I've never told anybody this publicly, by the way.
Oh, really?
So here you go, Duke.
There we
Like,
go.
literally when nobody was home, I, just packed up all my stuff and I left.
Uh-huh.
Because I was just tired of my life in Oxnard. I was tired of my life in Ventura County. I was tired of the way things were going.
Mhm.
So I just literally shut the door and I left. And I
Yeah,
think
that's
I didn't
yeah.
even talk to my family for like almost a year.
Wow, that's a massive
Um,
leap of faith right there. That
yeah,
you had there.
and it was kind of like I had something to prove that I was trying
Mhm,
to prove, though at the time I wasn't exactly sure what it was. And looking back on it, it's like I'm glad that I did it. I just
mhm.
kind of dove in head first. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do for money. But I had Tilden House. Stacy was helping me, every step of the way. So like literally owe my life in LA to her. Like the
Yeah.
reason why I survived and why I continue to survive to this day is because of her. So she's like, to this day, probably the most important cog,
Mhm.
which just even feels unfair to call her that. It's the
Yeah.
most important pillar in my life to this day. Um, that survival is because of her and just
Mhm.
because for, whatever she saw in me. But anyway, eventually I like found a job from just going out to like the theater, to the Egyptian theater. I had a friend, Jim, who worked there, who offered me a job. So it's like, okay, I'll make some money doing this.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I just thought, okay, I had set up some gigs with directors I had met going to screenings, started doing their stuff in terms of scoring. Literally, I can send you a photo later if you want to
Mhm.
see it, just out of curiosity.
Oh,
But
yeah,
my
yeah.
first film score, I started working on when I was still at Ventura College,
Mhm.
and the setup was like a micro Korg keyboard,
Uh-huh.
that what that was like this big. That one of my friends had let me borrow, and my weak MacBook Pro that couldn't even keep
Mhm.
up with all the samples. I had no idea how to score a movie because now it's as I had mentioned, I learned to compose music with pencil and paper.
Mhm.
That's not how you score movies anymore. It's just the turnaround time is so fast. And now with all the technology that's available, producers want to hear what the score is going to sound like yesterday.
Oh, I
Um,
see.
so you got to be able to produce music like quickly. So going back a little bit, one of the kind of wake up calls that I had was Bart Tompkins, who is the band director at Ocean View Junior High School.
Mhm.
Again, still great, connected with him, great friend to this day. He asked me if I would chaperone the band to a trip to the Grammy Museum, and this must have been in
Mhm.
2012 because part of it is like we're going to go listen to this guy speak named Austin Wintory, who's a video game composer.
Mhm.
He did like Journey, and he's trying to get into
Oh, yeah,
movies.
Journey,
He's
yeah.
done a couple, and it's like Austin's going to speak, but then also the Grammy Museum currently has the Beach Boys exhibit for their 50th anniversary. So I thought you might get something out of this in addition to helping me out chaperone. And I thought
Oh, there we
I'd
go.
love to go, sure.
Mhm.
And listen to Austin speak. That was my first wake up call, where basically he goes, "When you're a film composer, you're a media composer these days. You're not just a musician. You're part musician. You're part computer technician, and oh my god, little did I know that that's what most of my time is spent doing now. Is how do I
Yeah.
program all of the various aspects of these libraries and things
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
work with, because that's how I write now, to suit my needs and try to get them sound as realistic as possible, because the films that I'm doing
Mhm.
up to this point haven't really had the budget to like hire musicians or an orchestra, or I've only been able to hire a couple of musicians here and there, like a guitar or something.
Uh-huh.
And Austin and oh my god, that was absolutely right. In a way, I kind of laughed it off. I was like, computer technician, whatever.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely right, because that's really what you do. You use the technology to your advantage to produce music as quick as you can
Right.
to suit the needs of the film. In
Yeah,
any
what
way,
so what kind of programs are you using? Are you using Sibelius? Um
so my notation for actual like preparation of parts and
Uh-huh.
notation, I use Sibelius.
Uh-huh.
But the actual composing I do in Logic Pro X.
Okay.
when I was living at Tilden House, which is Chris Young's program,
Mhm.
I was living with two other composers, which was another great experience. One of them was this dude who I think was like born in Mexico and he was raised there somewhat, but he like had also grown up in Austria. So he's this Austrian
Yeah.
Mexican guy named
Very interesting.
another great composer named
Yeah.
Ralph Lichtenberg. God, I love Ralph. And Ralph had a ton of just great advice and what to do and how the business works. And he was going to UCLA Extension at the same time,
Mhm.
so I was getting to see what he was working on, and he gave me an idea of kind of the level of work. And my other roommate was this guy named Sebastian Pan, who was a French composer living in New Zealand. And Sebastian came out because he came out to LA and did Tilden House because he was coming out here for meetings. And yeah, he himself was actually already a successful composer. He was doing
Uh-huh.
like animated series down in New Zealand. Um, and he was the first one who said, get a hard drive and I'll give you everything you need. I'll give you a cracked version of Logic. I'll give you a
There you
cracked
go.
version of all the samples. And my understanding is that that's not an uncommon way of how people get started in
Yeah.
this business is like, somebody gives you an illegal version of what you need.
Mhm.
And at that point, my first film score was composed in GarageBand.
Uh-huh.
So if anyone tells me that, like, you can't compose film scores with a trackpad and in GarageBand, I tell them that's how I did mine. That's how I did my first one.
Yeah.
And Logic was just kind of this mind-opening thing where I thought, oh, there's so much that you can do here. That's just constantly been like, catching up. But my process now is like I write in Logic, Logic Pro X. The parts are exported into Sibelius where, if need be.
Mhm.
Like lately I've been doing some arrangements for this group in New York called Quartato. They're a horn quartet, and I've done
Mhm.
I Can Go the Distance from Hercules, and I did an arrangement of Somewhere in My Memory from Home Alone, which is by John Williams, for them. And it's like I write it in Logic, and then I export it into Sibelius and just kind of correct and clean up all the parts. And that's really it. The pencil and paper stage, which I still love to write with, especially when I do all my kind of like composition studying and exercises.
Mhm.
I don't do them in the computer. Like I do them with pencil and paper to really kind of like ingrain them in my mind.
Uh-huh.
Um, that's just the very beginning of the idea stage, trying to come up with themes or maybe interesting harmonies and chords. That's just the beginning, and then otherwise just kind of all done on a computer.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't when I was looking through the short films that you scored, before I didn't really have scoring and actually performing the score as two separate things, because that's kind of the vibe I'm getting right now is that playing the score that's composed is different from writing it. Um,
Yeah,
I always lump those two
and
together for
yeah,
whatever
it's
reason.
I write it, and you program the samples to play themselves,
Mhm.
and you just kind of write it that way, and because of when you hit a so it's all using MIDI, right? MIDI
Mhm.
files. So when you hit a note on your MIDI controller, which is a keyboard that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sound, it just responds to MIDI. The keyboard has to send a signal into the computer. The computer then
Mhm.
has to find that particular sample because we use sample libraries. So
Mhm.
we'll download programs, whole orchestras, string sections, brass, woodwind, and then the computer has to play that sample back. And there are limitations to it. Like they can't do what real musicians can do. So they're getting frighteningly good,
Mhm.
but they're not quite there. I think they never will be because a clarinet sample can sound fantastic, but it's never going to have the intuition that just decades of experience
Yeah. Yeah.
that a real musician will have. Um, and so, so part of it has to be performed. Like I think I sent you Klaudia, right, which was a
Yeah, yeah.
short film that I
Yeah, yeah.
did, and there's a centerpiece in it, which that gig was given to me, or I was like, brought to the attention of these filmmakers in New York because the guys who made it are in New York, and by somebody that I was friends with at Ventura College who went to the new school, Manus out in
Mhm.
Manhattan, and she said, "Hey, you should get this guy to compose your score." And luckily, they were crazy enough to do it. And I knew that if I nailed that montage where they go on a date, the
Mhm.
rest of the score was going to fall into place. And this was all I never studied how to score a movie. The only thing that I was going on was being a film freak my entire life and
Yeah.
watching all these documentaries about, you know, how movies are made, and sort of having an understanding of story and characters and how you develop characters in a film
Mhm.
or whatever. And then watching, you know, videos of like John Williams talking about how he approaches, you know, scoring scenes of a movie or whatever. And I knew that that was like the whole thing was going to be centered around this one kind of emotional core
Yeah.
of this moment. So I don't know if you want to drop the link to it like in the description,
Oh,
please
yeah.
please do, so
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
people
Yeah.
could get context. Um so those parts had to have a sincerity. So I was, you know, not much of a piano player, but that piano part that you hear, I
Uh-huh.
played that myself. Like
Oh, okay.
I knew
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't going to get away with programming it. Like I had to actually perform it. And then the string parts I had to perform myself via the keyboard, and we use like a controller to control we use faders
Mhm.
like you see in a recording studio to control like dynamics and expression. So if you have an expression fader, so when you push it all the way up, it becomes this really loud, really intense, really like,
Yeah.
you know, vibrato heavy sound. And then when you move it back down, it becomes very soft. And I knew that that was gonna, you know, that this had to be played. So approaching Klaudia was like probably the first kind of peak where I thought in my career as a composer for
Mhm.
media, because I think now we work in so many different medias. Like you don't just have film anymore. You have
Right.
podcasts, you have web series, you have, you know,
Yep.
YouTube content, you have video games.
Mhm.
So like in my first step as a media composer, or trying to make it as a media composer, was like, you know, that was the first one where I realized like, wow, this is basically what it's going to take to make an impression.
Yeah.
uh and that was like a pretty eye-opening experience working on that Klaudia competition, on that Klaudia score. But it's
Mhm.
relatively small, like it's only written for like string section
Uh-huh.
and piano, and I use you know, so I had a great chamber sized
Mhm.
string section library.
Yeah.
So it's like a relatively small string section, only like 16 players, so it has a really intimate and
Uh-huh.
up close sound, which I thought would fit it better than like, you know,
No, I
a
agree, yeah.
library that's meant to sound like a mass symphony orchestra, you know, like, you know,
Right.
60 or 50 strings or whatever. I thought that would work better.
Okay.
Um so that one was great because, but as you mentioned, Duke, I realized partway into writing the score, and it didn't feel quite right, that
Mhm.
I realized I need to play these parts, not just program them into the computer. Like these are actually going to need some extra like emotion and sensibility to make them work.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question, like, how much of it is played and how much of it is electronic or edited in post or that sort of thing, or is if there's a or if there's, like, a hybrid between the 2?
It's all smoke and mirrors. Now it's like a hybrid between the two. And I
Uh-huh.
guess that's something that I'm trying to take away from Orson Welles, is that
Yeah.
he did this great documentary called F for Fake about how you can use, you know, media to create illusions.
Mhm.
I highly recommend to everybody,
Yeah.
especially if you're high, watch F for Fake. um is now it's kind of a combination of all of it, because at some point I
I
just
see.
stopped caring, and it's like, forget it, I just need to edit parts and use quantize, which is, you know, you have like a grid,
Mhm.
and when you quantize everything and you play it, you know, humans aren't perfect, they're not machines. So you'll find that they'll play slightly ahead of the beat, they'll play slightly behind it. When you quantize it, Logic will
It
move
locks it
everything
in.
right to the beat, right on the grid,
Right,
locks it
okay.
in. Yeah. Humans don't play that way, so too much quantizing can have a very like not great effect on your music. It can make it very square, make it very sound very
Yeah.
cold and human. Um and now it's a combination of everything, because sometimes you know, when you like kind of like in that Westworld entry for the contest that I sent you, those string
Yeah.
parts, when you just have, you know, string players chugging away playing rhythm
Mhm.
almost like you would hear in a guitar, that sounds really good quantized.
Mhm.
And really quantized, really sharp, really, you know, directed. Because then everyone is in sync with each other, and it creates like this really great intensity. But when it needs to flow a little bit and it needs to have room to breathe, that's definitely when, kind of playing, um, things as you would traditionally, like,
Mhm.
works a little bit better. And every project is different. Every film is
Yeah.
different. The needs of, one film might be completely different from the next. So it's just kind of like, you know, on a case by case basis as to
Mhm.
what will work best, or sometimes it might not even be that at all. The first film that I did was um heavily based on the score was heavily
Mhm.
based on the French avant-garde composers that I studied at Ventura College, who pioneered musique concrète, people like Pierre Boulez, and who really couldn't make music until the reel-to-reel tape recorder, or music of this nature until the reel-to-reel tape recorder was created, because then you could kind of create these collages of sound. And my first film score, which I can send you links afterwards if you're interested in hearing it, is like based on that, just a collection of kind of like weird sounds just coming in one after the other,
Yeah.
because that's what that project needed. Whereas the Klaudia
I
thing
see.
needed like a much more traditional, sort of like a romantic type of score.
Yeah, yeah. From Claudia, I got a very reflective tone on it. That was the thing I noted down. And it's definitely something that, I would listen to if I was being like retrospective on life, something like that. And I think that's what you were going for, um, with the scoring.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think ultimately the one thing that I've learned about, scoring, just from talking to other composers or whatever, is
Mhm.
that ultimately, if it doesn't work for the film, it doesn't work, period.
Yeah.
Well, actually, let me correct that. If it doesn't work for the film, um, it should be taken out, because
Yeah.
you might, like the Westworld thing. Obviously, that's an action cue.
Mhm.
So in film scoring, the pieces of music are referred to as cues, like they're
Okay.
numbered. So they're called music cues because you like cue a piece of music or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
and they're like numerated. So like the cue that you heard for Westworld is like an action thing.
Mhm.
That would not work anywhere in Klaudia, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an extreme example of what I'm talking about. So kind of every film is unique, and for Klaudia, it's about this guy who goes to Italy, who is lost in his life. And I think if you're young, especially a man, if you're a young male, the way that society has
Yep.
crafted us, um that's like a very reflective thing. You're lost, you don't know where to go. But I think also just that kind of greatly plays into a human experience. So I could relate to the director of the short is the star of it,
Oh, okay.
Ryan Schuler.
Yeah, yeah.
And I could relate to that a lot. So I knew the score had to be very reflective, and kind of like, it's about self-discovery and sort of, finding who you are, and or who you are in a relationship. Um and that informed me probably more than anything else. Which is why that score is the way that it is.
Mhm.
It had to be that for the film. Really couldn't be anything else. There's one cue in there that's
Yeah.
like a little bit of almost like it's got like a dancey type of feel for when he's kind of wandering around Italy, sort of, not
Uh-huh.
sure of what's going on, or why he's even there. And that could be a little more fun and lively, because it had to be.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that came through discussions with the director that informed that choice. Whereas the rest of the score is kind of, is much less fun. It's a little more serious, a little more introspective.
Yep. Yeah, so when you're scoring, do you have like like is the film already shot and then you're adding music onto it, or does that happen at the same time? Like is
You
there a
know,
script?
only one short that I've done comes to mind, where I was
Mhm.
given a script first, and then the music that I wrote based on the script made it into the final film.
Uh-huh.
There is a holiday horror anthology called Deathcember,
Uh-huh.
where a bunch of friends and I made a short that's one of the segments. With It's like 24, 25 segments in this horror anthology, and they're all like kind of centered around Christmas. And we did a throwback to a genre of Italian horror movies called giallo,
Mhm.
where they all had these tropes. They're like Italian murder mysteries, or as Stacy describes them, like it's basically like Scooby Doo, but
Uh-huh.
with people getting murdered and a bunch of Italian people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the writer of that short is a very good friend. Actually, all the people who made it are like really good friends.
Mhm.
And he gave me the script, and I was like so inspired by it that I wrote from the script in that case, and some of the music actually made it into the final film. Not normally how I like to work. I like to have an experience as close as possible
Mhm.
to what the audience will see.
Right.
Because and this is something that I picked up from John Williams, where I think my experience um, of an audience member, or the reaction that an audience member would have, informs how my scoring choices.
Mhm.
Like it's like if I'm watching. So I always tell the director, so when a movie is done, how well not finished, but when like they're done shooting and they've done a
Mhm.
rough assembly, or if they've done an assembly that's not going to be edited any further, that's called picture lock.
Uh-huh.
So like when they give you a movie and it's edited but it still needs music, sound effects,
Yeah.
special effects, whatever, it's locked. So I've been lucky enough that most of the films that I've worked from have been locked, but not
Uh-huh.
always the case. And if it's locked, then that's as close as I'm going to get to what an audience member is going to see. And if I'm bored, I think to myself, maybe I can write something exciting here that's going to help push the film forward.
Yeah, yeah.
If the actors are really good, and they're delivering a great, I know, okay, I need to stay out of their way. So the music can't be calling too much attention to
Right.
itself or whatever it's doing here. Um, or maybe if there's subtext to what they're saying, maybe some, like if a character is revealed to be villainous or something later, maybe we could do a little foreshadowing in the music,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so provide some subtext or something like that.
Mhm.
So and that all depends, if that depends on whether the film is locked or not. Like the second short that I sent to you was or that you saw, that you had a chance to see, was Sidewinder. And Sidewinder wasn't locked when I started working on it. Like the film continued to go through edits as I was
Yeah.
composing the score. And at that point, something that I learned from band, because I didn't do it well in band,
Uh-huh.
um, was communication. And
Uh-huh.
communication is really key with the directors in that case, when you're writing music and the film is changing. So I remember when I was working on Sidewinder, well, first off, the director, and this frequently happens, is that nowadays movies are temp scored. Or actually, movies have always been temp scored, where someone's editing the film, and they put a piece of music on it to kind of help with the determine the pace and the rhythm, or maybe
Mhm.
there's just like a piece of music that they really like, and they thought, they think this is going to inform what the tone of this scene should be like.
Oh, okay. So it's
Um,
just like a placeholder,
a
sort of.
placeholder. Sometimes the filmmakers are really in love with the temp score, and that can be
Yeah.
problematic, because it's like, all right, I want you to compose something that sounds like this or is like this.
Yeah.
A really famous example is Alex North, who's one of the legendary film composers in our industry.
Mhm.
Um, was hired to write a score for 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Uh-huh.
which was temp scored by Stanley Kubrick with all these classical staples of the genre. And Kubrick didn't like his score, so he threw it out, and he licensed the recordings of the classical pieces, and he put them in the film. And the rest is history.
Mhm.
That's kind of the extreme of what can happen when a director really loves a temp score. And so when I did Sidewinder, it was temped entirely with music from Sicario, which is by
Uh-huh.
the great Icelandic composer Jóhann Jóhannsson, who became one of my idols when I moved out to LA. Like I remember seeing
Mhm.
Sicario, I think twice in one day when I moved out here. Like I was so blown away by it that I left the theater, bought another ticket, went right back in, because I was so blown away by this film. So when I heard Sicario on the temp score for Sidewinder, I thought, oh my God, this guy wants me to write something like Jóhann Jóhannsson.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when we had our first meeting, I told him, first off, we need to check our expectations at the door. If you think I'm going to write anything better than Jóhann Jóhannsson, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like it's it's
Yeah,
not,
dude, I'm not, yeah.
I'm not that good. Nowhere near that level of just like, like to me, I just love, scoring movies because I love doing the work. I love writing music. I love, the challenge. to me, Johan is like a true artist, you
Mhm.
know, through and through. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But if you like listen to his music and you read up on him, it's like, man, this guy, his mind was elsewhere. And the director of Sidewinder, TK Sham, is this. He's great. He just kind of laughed that off, and he's like, "I'm interested in what you'll bring to it." So if you listen to the score for Sicario and you listen to my score for Sidewinder, definitely like the biggest influence. But I basically had to change the way that I wrote music.
Yeah.
You know, the way that I learned, and this goes back to my days at Ventura College. I learned like here's a melody, here's how you develop a melody, here's chords, you know, that melody can fit over. And with Sidewinder, it was more about textures.
Mhm.
And you know, this texture is like very dark, so this is going to work here. This texture is a little more exciting. We'll bring in some drums to create tension.
Oh yeah,
Um,
definitely heard the drums.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like big drums, which I'm not a fan of. Like I'm not a fan of writing like huge drum kind of features. But that is like a very modern action scoring thing where because of like guys like Hans Zimmer, you get these huge
Yeah.
drums. And so that was like a challenge in and of itself to write these like big drums. And then the director, and then TK said the movie needs a signature, like it needs like a sound. So I had a sample of like a hard mallet on like a huge stretched
Mhm.
calfskin drum. And you know, as you know, that you know, sound is created by vibrating air,
Right.
or you know, on instruments, you vibrate a membrane. So, like on a woodwind, it would be a reed vibrates. On a
Mhm.
brass instrument, you buzz your lips. That creates the vibration that makes the sound. On a drum, the skin of the drum will vibrate, right? Like
Mhm.
when you hit the head or something. And I had this great. There's a technique you can use where you take a mallet and you just drag it on the skin of a drum,
Mm.
and it vibrates and creates the most eerie sound, almost like a moaning, like a wail or a moaning. So I took that
Uh-huh.
sample that I had and I ran it through guitar effects pedals to create
Uh-huh.
a a really almost like synthesized, like unreal kind of moaning, which is that weird electronic sound you hear in Sidewinder that you hear towards like the end when she's walking through the house with like the gun drawn.
I see.
Um, and it's kind of like that element of having to think a little bit outside the box. Again, like Klaudia needed nothing of that nature, like
Oh yeah,
very
no.
traditional,
Yeah.
like a romantic score. I don't even remember what your question was now.
Oh,
but you know, that was my experience where, you know, oh yes, yeah, we were talking about kind of like, you know, the script or whatever. But the case of Sidewinder was like this was a movie that I saw, and then as I worked on it, it continued to change. So communicating with the director informed how those changes were done.
yeah.
And I
Yeah, yeah.
began to learn that in band, where it was like, you know, we worked in sections and I had to communicate information to sections or whatever. So that would be, I guess, another nugget of knowledge that I'm going to drop on any future bandies that have made it this far into this video, which is communication is key. And like in
Yeah.
life, in music, learn how to communicate, read books on communication, and like, you know, relationships, both, you know, personal and professional, and that will get you far. But again, that, you know, my communication with the director informed all those choices, even as he continued to make changes with it.
Mhm.
And you know, we got something that when it was done, you know, I don't like to pat myself on the back. I don't like to.
Yeah. I
I
get it,
can't
yeah.
listen to my music. Like I can't remove myself from my music. Like whenever I hear anything that I've done, whether it be at Ventura College where it was concert works, or whether it be the film scores that I've worked on, I can't detach myself and just enjoy it for what it is. I always hear it and think
Mm.
to myself, wish I would have done that, or I know
Yeah.
so much more now than I did when I worked on it. Like, you know, there's always room for improvement. Like the scores could always be better, but you know, it is what it is in that regard.
Yeah, you're your biggest critic. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you know, that's kind of like another thing with pursuing the arts is knowing how to receive criticism, how to accept criticism, and knowing how to decipher good criticism from bad criticism.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Because, you know, it's easy to hear something, again, kind of going relating to that situation where you tried to clap a rhythm.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, what the hell? Um, bad criticism.
Yeah.
Sort of. You know,
Hmm.
the delivery was not good. But
But the message was there. The message was
the message
there.
was
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was something at Ventura College. And when you're a music major, actually, you have to take some class of this nature, some sort of musicianship class at Ventura College. It was called Applied Music, where all the music majors have to take it. So if you're a music
Uh-huh.
major, you have to enroll in this course, and you have to share whatever it is you're working on. If you're a singer,
Mm.
you sing a piece that you're trying to work on, and there's room for improvement. If you're an instrumentalist, you'll perform something maybe that you're trying to work on. If you're a composer,
Uh-huh.
you'll present a piece. And your fellow classmates will listen to it. They will critique it anonymously. They'll write like
Hmm.
on a piece of paper what they think. And that was probably the best exercise that I had for being able to decipher good criticism from bad criticism. I
Right.
remember I
Yeah.
wrote a saxophone quartet that was a tango, and a tango is a dance form that was in no way meant to be able to be danced to. Like
Hmm.
this thing was a joke. I think it was in the key of A, and I had the baritone sax player play an A sharp as the last note, like literally
Uh-huh.
play a wrong note. Like that's how I wrote it. It was meant to be a joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
I called it "How Does This Tango?" Right?
Uh-huh.
So, and when I introduced the piece, I explained this, and we like performed it for the class. Like we actually had the four guys there, including myself, and we performed it. And that was an eye-opening experience in terms of how to, communicating my ideas as to here's what this is, and then how the class perceived it, because I had somebody wrote, "There's no way you could dance to this," and I said, "Yeah, well, that was the point. I mean,
Yeah.
the point is that this piece is bullshit, and if you took it seriously, then that kind of speaks more to what
To
you're
you.
bringing to
Yeah.
what you're bringing to my piece of music as opposed to what I'm bringing
Yeah.
to you."
Dang. So
But
was it basically like a meme piece then?
yes, yes, it was. Yes, it was, Duke.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. Mm, awkward silence. But anyway, yeah, that was. But whole huge circle back. You know, communication, something that I
Mhm.
sort of started in band and that I had to learn to refine. And as a human being, you will refine for the rest of your life. And if you're a good communicator, you're going to go far professionally, socially, romantically. And if you're not,
Yep.
you will struggle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I like seeing the parallels in other businesses because in the industry that I work in, the software industry, there's a ton of teams that I have to interact with. There's my immediate coworkers who pretty much do the same job. So I'm an iOS developer. I make iPhone, iPad apps,
Okay.
basically. Um,
Wow.
but there's a whole bunch of other teams that we have to communicate with. There's my manager. He kind of manages the project. There's people that manage the business logic and the database. They're a whole separate team, and um, they sort of provide the interface with how the iOS app is supposed to communicate with. Um, and if the communication is really bad, then we're like, okay, how are these supposed to talk to each other? How is the
Right.
app and the backend is supposed to communicate with each other? If our communication breaks down, then the communication of the app breaks down, essentially. Um,
Yeah,
s-
and it's funny because I think as you get older and you have a job or you have
mhm.
a family or whatever, you take in college you can't actually take right like communication
Right.
classes. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
took I
Yeah.
took an interpersonal relationships course at Oxnard College. Um but I don't know if at the time I just treated it as just like I need to take this class and to
Yeah.
just basically meet the requirements.
Right.
But looking back on it, it's like I wish I would have actually paid closer attention to
Hmm.
this, because that's really all life is as you get older, is professionally. I mean, you communicate with your employers, or if you are the employer, you communicate with your employees. You have to
Hmm.
communicate with people that you work with. You mentioned developing software and things like that for apps, or working on
Yeah.
apps where each kind of component has to be able to communicate well with each
Right.
other.
Yeah.
And admittedly, something that I still struggle with and that I myself am still working on, and it's like, coming out here. Totally not ashamed to admit this, but it's like, I was like, one of the reasons why I went to therapy was because it's like, I got to work on my communications because there's like
Yeah.
problems here.
Dude, my whole family needs to go to therapy. I need to go to therapy. Like, it's
It's like there's such a stigma built around
yeah,
it that
exactly.
once I actually, at first I was really resistant to it. Like,
Yeah.
for one reason or another, I was like going that I won't divulge or I won't get into, but it's
Mhm.
like finally came to the point where it's like, all right, I gotta go. But again, one of my professors at Ventura College, but the reason why I think I even gave it a chance and didn't continue to laugh it off or dismiss it or whatever was because one of my professors, admittedly, one of my professors at Ventura College said, he was like in his 80s
Uh-huh.
and he was still going to therapy, and
Oh
he said,
wow.
it's not a bad. He said it's not a bad thing. He goes, sometimes you just need somebody to talk to
Yep.
who knows how to listen and who's not gonna, really have any opinion or bias as to what
Right.
you're
Right.
talking about. Um, and I agree. That's kind of what mine became after a while, is that I just needed somebody to listen to what I had to say and to, at key moments sort of, give me some material to reflect on or some things to reflect on. And there's such a stigma around it, around, um at Duke, as Asian people and Latinos are really similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our parents have such a stigma around,
Yeah,
therapy.
it's at least from the Asian perspective, it's very traditional. There's a structure. There's this in Vietnamese it's a very hierarchical like social structure, and that's definitely affected me and my interactions with people because in Vietnamese culture, it's like if you're interacting with someone who's older, then like you have to give them a certain amount of respect no matter what kind of person they are, if they're a bad or good person. Um, and the moment they're younger than you, then you can kind of just throw all of that to the side. It's really strange. And so I brought that, to me with my relationships, whether it's in school or work. And no, it's just really strange because, I think of myself, if I'm speaking with someone older, I think of them like as up here and I'm like down here, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um,
Right. And
it's
it's like, I remember, amongst like older Latinos, when you mention, I don't know, if you're having an issue, like, maybe you want to talk to somebody about it, or maybe go to therapy or something,
yeah.
automatically the stigma around it
Hmm.
is, you think I'm crazy.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, no, far from that. As a matter of, if you're crazy, that's a whole other procedure we have to take.
yeah, yeah.
It's like, you have to listen to somebody who is like a specialist in and communication, how it pertains to the mind, and sort of how,
Yeah.
how what you're saying is like reflective of that. And definitely, it is. I think there's like, there's nothing bad around it. Whenever I hear other friends mention that they were going to therapy, like I think nothing of it. It's, I think, a
Right.
stigma that absolutely should go away, and that something everyone should do. Actually, much like taking instrument lessons. I think
Hmm.
even if you're just doing this as a hobby and you have no interest in pursuing this as a career,
Hmm.
slurring my words now. This is how drunk I am. It's like, if you have
Yeah.
no interest in relating back to what we were talking to, like if you have no interest in
Hmm.
pursuing this as a career, you should still
Yeah.
take a couple lessons anyway, just out of respect for, your instrument, which is
Yeah.
hundreds of years old. Like,
Right.
there have
Yeah,
been
yeah.
people who have dedicated their lives to this thing, who have died, wondering how they could make it better. Who have dedicated their lives to improving the engineering of these
Hmm.
instruments. The
Yeah,
least you can
yeah.
do is take a half-hour lesson
Yeah.
from somebody who can play it better than you can,
Hmm.
and who can give you a little bit of advice and direction on how to approach it better.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess that sort of wraps up the last kind of like 5 years pre-pandemic. Was,
Yeah, yeah.
I had this I had this job at the theater, which was really frustrating, but it allowed me to sort
Yeah.
of focus on creative, like, at the theater, at the, working at the Egyptian and the Arrow, because I
Mhm.
eventually started managing at our second location. Was great because I got to meet all these people, be around filmmakers. And I feel like, something that I told Stacy recently was, when I lost my job back in March of last year, related to the pandemic, was working at a movie theater sort of affected how I watched movies. I
Uh-huh.
didn't enjoy movies in the way that I used to. Like I remember when I got into The Omen in high school,
Mhm.
and I loved it so much that I even
Yeah.
like Terrell asked to borrow it, and we were like nerding out over The
Yeah, yeah.
Omen. And movies took on a whole different meaning. And then when the pandemic happened, um, for a while there, all I could do was just open a streaming service and watch something. And it was
Yeah.
kind of like rediscovering a part of myself that I had sort of fallen out of phase with working at a movie theater. And recently, I started reading this book called Easy Riders Raging Bulls, which is about
Mhm.
the new Hollywood movement in filmmaking at the end of the 60s, when the studios couldn't make any money. So they started turning to young people into auteurs, to kind of, do new types of movies, very character focused, sort of, bring new audiences in. And I've been watching a lot of the movies as I've been going along reading the book, and I've been
Uh-huh.
telling Stacy, like, "Oh my god, I love movies!" Like in a way that I haven't like loved them in a long time,
Uh-huh.
and that's been very great because the way I've been trying to reason it is, because I want to work in narrative storytelling,
Mhm.
I should have an idea, or I should have an understanding of how narratives work. How you
Yeah.
construct a story, how you build a character arc, why some characters are good and why some characters are not. And so, the pandemic is probably the best gift that the two best gifts that the pandemic has given me has been sort of getting in touch with, that kind of film lover that was lost having
Mhm.
to work at a movie theater. And also the fact that, I really love my girlfriend. Like it's like we've been around each other for so
There we go.
long.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's like, oh my God, how do you put up with me and all my bullshit for
yeah.
this much? It's been that's kind of been the two greatest things, but then also taking the time to, I took a lot of music courses and educate myself and, brush up on a lot of what I felt was kind of like weak areas and things like that
Mhm.
early on, especially with the technology, because I feel like I still haven't caught up. Um, there are like 15-year-olds who are, producing the hell out of stuff that they're doing, and I'm like barely learning how to like automate a volume in Logic or something like that. And it's like
Yeah, yeah.
having to fill in those types of things.
Yeah, occasionally I'll have like those garage band videos come up on YouTube. They're just so
Right.
random, like random garage
Right.
band videos, and they'll recreate some like really popular track or
Mhm.
something like that. Um Going back to the shorts, for Sidewinder, there was I don't know if you were talking about this earlier, but like around the 5 minute mark when the lady officer is like in the house, there's this
Yeah.
big crescendo. I don't know if that was like an instrument or if that was like a MIDI sample.
There's like that
Um, yeah,
that
yeah,
type of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's that sample that I was telling you about.
Uh-huh.
That is that like calfskin drum where you take
Oh, okay,
like a
yeah.
hard mallet, like hard plastic,
Mhm.
and then you just like kind of you apply some light pressure and you drag it on the surface,
Uh-huh.
um, and it creates this kind of like moaning sound. So that was the
Yeah.
sample, like raw.
Mhm.
But then I ran it through. Logic has some great like built-in guitar effects pedals. So then I
Mhm.
ran it through some pedals to kind of create like a really distorted, really kind of like nasty sound.
Mhm.
Because the movie needed a signature. The director was a huge fan of, uh, as I mentioned, Sicario. And Sicario has that, which is so funny because these, film scores, much like everything else, go through fads. So when The Dark Knight was like, a huge hit,
Yeah, yeah.
every movie became tempt with The Dark Knight. And when
Mhm.
Sicario kind of came on the scene, like I've seen, the privilege of getting to know a couple of friends who are filmmakers and, and talk with them and getting to see early cuts of their stuff. Um, like a lot of movies today are tempt with Sicario.
Uh-huh.
So Sicario has that signature sound, which is wrote a glissando, or kind of like a long portamento, which is when a string player moves
Mhm.
from one note to the next and they kind of slide up to the note or
Yeah, yeah.
slide down. And Sicario has that signature in the cue that's called the Beast. If you like look up the album on Spotify or Apple Music or
Mhm.
something, it's the Beast is the one that I'm talking about, where it's a bass section and they slide from a C in the in so the bass can, if they have an extension, can play from like the lowest C. The one I'm talking about is next octave up, and they
Mhm.
slide down from that C1 all the way down to like A1. So it's this
Uh-huh.
great type of a sound.
Mhm.
And the director's like, okay, that's the signature for that. We need a signature of that nature. And I thought, well, first off, it can't be string related because then it's going to be too obvious. So maybe something in the percussion, but
Mhm.
percussion played in like a not obvious way, so not hitting it. And I thought, well, maybe if we drag stuff on the heads of drums, that'll give us some that'll give us an
Yeah.
interesting sound. So I experimented with samples that I had of that, and just from my knowledge of playing in concert bands and things like that, techniques I'd heard done over the years. And this is also where your knowledge of orchestration, which you
Mhm.
learn as you go through music school, comes into play as well. And I thought, playing instruments in unconventional ways. And for Sidewinder, I thought we need a familiar instrument doing played in an unfamiliar way, and that'll
Mhm.
produce kind of like an eerie technique. And then because we needed it to be cranked to 11, I just fed it through like guitar pedals
Oh, I see.
because
Yeah.
it had to have that extra push.
Yeah, I would think that, dragging a mallet across, a drum head wouldn't make that loud of a sound. Did you have to like
Yeah.
in post like crank up the volume and get that volume to where it is at the top of the crescendo?
No, it's actually kind of like, well, on my first score. So where I got the idea from was on my first score, which is done for this director named
Uh,
Aaron Cabrero. First score I did was a movie called Vindicta, and it was this kind of surrealistic crime movie. Um, I was still at Ventura College, so I had access to some of the rooms, some of the instruments, and I talked to Robert Lawson, who's the department head there, who's my composition instructor. It's like, hey, Bob, I had to write this thing for a movie. I need spaces to do it. I need instruments. Would you mind if I just came in after hours one day and did it? And his answer was basically like, don't break anything. Don't make me look bad. Do
yeah.
whatever you. Anyway, the idea that I had, and this is a much more common technique than you like would realize,
Mhm.
would be I was actually to take a gong and to take a violin bow.
Uh-huh.
And take the violin bow, or for a gong, since it's like a heavy metal instrument, you need something
Yeah,
heavy
yeah,
like a
yeah.
bass bow or a cello bow. I think we used a cello bow. So if you want to like kind of like an instant version of this, if you want to, try it out yourself next time you get a chance. So, you kind of like put your hand on the gong lightly to sort of
Uh-huh.
stabilize it, and then you take the bow and you just bow the gong along the edge.
Uh-huh.
And you actually, depending on how much pressure you apply on the bow, it can be really soft or it can be really loud. And this could be
Uh-huh.
done with a lot of metallic percussion instruments. You could do it on a Glock. You could do it on a cymbal. And so there's like a couple of bowed gongs
Mhm.
in the score for Vindicta, which is my first score. And because at the time I had access to instruments and people, the score was mostly recorded, using real musicians and instruments. Whereas when I moved out to LA, I no longer had access to those things, so they became very sample based.
Mhm.
And also, I was trying to like nowadays, I'm trying to write more sort of like for orchestras and for sections of orchestras, as opposed to kind of like using individual instruments to create a sound. But in the case of Vindicta, I bowed this gong, and it's the most kind of like it's such an unsettling sound
Uh-huh.
that for Sidewinder, I thought we need something sort of to that nature. Like
Yeah.
we need like a common instrument played in an uncommon way.
Yeah.
And that would sort of kind of like taking the familiar and making it unfamiliar, something that
Yeah.
I guess has a side to it that you never sort of thought of, and that informed how I was going to write for that movie.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I actually paused it and then went back to see, how it sounded again to see like, oh, what instrument is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that is and thankfully, I had this sample. I had access to
Uh-huh.
these samples of just a bunch of drums, um, where somebody, was dragging these hard mallets on these calfskin drums.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I thought, okay, that's going to be the way to go, but that's not enough. I thought
Mhm.
it needs to be pushed further.
Uh-huh.
And that was when the idea sort of happened that I thought, well, why don't I just, and actually, again, going through the Brian Wilson band,
Mhm.
where, they have Probin, who I mentioned earlier. Probin plays the theremin like instrument in the Brian Wilson band for when they do like Good Vibrations or something. But to get the right sound, they put it through a guitar effects pedal. So I thought,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
why don't I just take a calfskin drum, and it's so easy to route audio and Logic. You
Uh-huh.
just kind of have to know the right settings. Why don't I just put it through some guitar effects pedals? And
Uh-huh.
TK loved it. I loved it. It turned out way better than I thought it ever could be.
Yeah, yeah.
So that ended up becoming sort of like the signature of the movie.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, it really built up the suspense. I was just curious, how that sound was constructed.
Hmm.
Because I like my first thought is, what instruments are being played, here, you know.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
Hmm.
Let's see. When I was going through the Westworld scoring competition, I thought that sounded great. I just felt like I was watching like a trailer for Westworld. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm kind of like like a normie in terms of, I guess, films and TV series, but that's what I felt like. Like nothing really stood out to me, except for the use of silence. Is there like a name for that? Like when you're building up to something and then just silence in the music?
Are you talking about like sort of that pause in between, like when the car explodes and
Yeah, yeah.
silence is really it's again, I mentioned earlier the new Hollywood stuff, and
Hmm.
if you actually go, like, for example, if you go back into Jaws.
Hmm.
So to me, John Williams is probably, and this is a controversial statement, like,
Yeah.
I don't have a
Uh,
degree. I decided to like not pursue a degree for one reason or another. Um, but in my professional opinion, um, you know, John Williams is the greatest composer, American composer of the 20th and 21st century
mhm.
so far. Because we are in the still in the infancy of the
Right. Yep.
21st century. And back, I mentioned the new Hollywood movement, which was primarily in the 70s, and um, watching something like Jaws, there are so many moments in that movie that actually don't have score in them, but
Yeah.
we remember the moments that do. And a very modern thing is that movies of that nature, monster movies, action movies, thrillers, have wall to wall music in them. And something that I try to bring to the table whenever I do a movie now is, okay, it's not that I'm being lazy, but how much silence could we get away with?
Yeah.
What's acceptable? What feels okay to the filmmaker? And in the case of the Westworld thing, it's what's interesting is I've sort of done two features. I did a feature
Mhm.
film last year, and again, same deal, is like, how much silence could I work into this thing? But short films generally need more music than features do. Like, why is a good question. I have
Yeah.
no idea.
It's probably just the build, the
The
story.
build you need, because it's so short, you have to make your point faster
Right.
if
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to go for. But for the Westworld thing, it is an out of context clip. So that
Mhm.
was a contest that Spitfire Audio did. Spitfire is a great company that does a lot of these sample libraries. Um, and Spitfire, did this contest. I thought, so many people are going to enter this. I
Mhm.
don't have a shot in hell. Um, I'm trying to, I'm influenced by composers that are 50, 60, 70, or because Beethoven, I think, is the greatest composer that ever
Mhm.
lived, hundreds of years old. I'm
Yeah.
not going to win this thing. Like, I'm not trying to stand out.
Mhm.
Here's the shot for me to write music for a car chase that I have yet to do. So I'm literally just going to dump the kitchen sink into this thing
Mhm.
orchestrally. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
want to use any electronics or anything.
Right.
So, I kind of leaned on John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith, who, was the great composer who did music for like Total Recall, The Mummy,
Mhm.
um, Basic Instinct, um, Chinatown, movies like that. And Goldsmith liked to use a lot of mixed meters. So I thought I'm going to use, mixed meters and different time
Mhm.
signatures in this. And for Westworld, I found that there was, the first half of the cue is actually sort of stylistically different from the second half. There's a
Uh-huh.
lot of kind of like, you do get some melodies. There's that da 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 da,
Mhm.
and I thought that was the melody that stood out in my mind. Um, and I thought, okay, the whole thing is kind of sort of being an exploration of that melody. And then the second half, when the car explodes and the
Yep.
second SUV comes through it, I
Uh-huh.
thought this is just pure exhilaration. So all it needs is rhythm. It
Yeah,
just
yeah.
needs to be more rhythmic there than anything else. Um, so for the Westworld thing, that I thought, here's a unique opportunity where I know I'm not going to do anything with this. I'm not going to
Mhm.
place. I don't care about winning. I don't want to win. I just want to score a car chase
Mhm.
because I've never done it. Um, and to do it orchestrally. There's even a choir in there. Like I
Oh,
literally
yeah, I
just
didn't know
just
that.
yeah, I thought, let me take I have a great sort of choir sample where
Mhm.
they'll start on a chord, but then they'll quickly devolve into just this atonal, just kind of mesh of everyone singing
Uh-huh.
random notes. And it's that crescendo right as like that missile hits the car.
Mhm.
It's on that wood, it's just that and like a bunch of woodwinds playing trills and clusters. And so the Westworld thing is really just an
Mhm.
exercise in like, let me see what I can do to write an action cue, but to
Yeah.
also write something that's not really in a key.
Mm.
That's like, constantly modulating and constantly changing and constantly moving, which harkens more back to the days of like, composers like John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith than, any of the contemporary composers today.
Uh-huh. Sweet.
Um, so that was
Yep.
that, and I really loved doing that. And it could have been easy to just write one thing straight through, but then I thought, because the first half is sort of stylistically different from the second half,
Mhm.
there should be a break here. I thought, because something that I also really love from John Williams writing is that he's not afraid to write a timpani part that is so loud that it overpowers the entire group.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so there's that like da da doom, and I thought,
Mhm.
let me write this just these timpani hits that are so loud that it's
Mhm.
just going to lead us into the second half.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, and because I just love that kind of loud soloistic timpani.
Mhm.
Um, John Williams' dad was a percussionist in the studios, and Bernard
Mhm.
Herrmann, who wrote the music for Vertigo and Psycho and a bunch of Hitchcock films, loved to use him on his scores because apparently he wasn't afraid to hit the drums super hard, even if there was a mic right there.
Uh-huh.
And he said things like, you know, old man Williams isn't afraid to break a head. And that was kind of the attitude that I took into the Westworld thing, was it
Yeah,
should it
yeah.
should just be intense and it should be in your face.
Yeah, there's that dialogue right in the middle that sort of breaks it up into two halves. How does dialogue play into scoring? Like, do you have to
So
turn that down? Do you gotta
yeah, obviously, if the dialogue, dialogue is important. If it's
Mhm.
there, it's because it's supposed to be there. So one of the tricks is, lining up all the shots and all of the meters and all of the
Mhm.
musical elements to feel natural, so that when we do get dialogue, the music can stay underneath it enough
Yeah.
to let that dialogue come forward.
Yeah.
And something that I learned at Ventura College was that Leonard Bernstein, who's one of the foremost like American composers and educators, only ever did one film score because he hated that he had to stay out of the way of dialogue and sound effects and things like that. And
Yeah, yeah.
it wasn't for him. And for me, it's like I'm up to the challenge. It's like, that's just another element of like Goldsmith scored these great action cues. Like one that comes to mind is from the movie Air Force One with Harrison
Mhm.
Ford, where the terrorists are hijacking Air Force One. There's a ton of dialogue peppered throughout the scene. And that music cue on the soundtrack album, I think is presented exactly the same as it is in the movie.
Mhm.
Oftentimes composers will arrange it for the album where you take stuff out, you take it out of the movie and you have to shorten or lengthen certain spots to make it work. But I think in the case of the hijacking, it's exactly the same in the movie as it is on the album. And it feels so natural. Like every part is designed musically well. And when you put it in the movie,
Mhm.
like the dialogue fits perfectly over these sequences. Like it's so well crafted, which is what pisses me off when people say, oh, like, composers who write for movies are lesser composers because
Uh-huh.
they don't have complete freedom. It's like, you're telling me that Goldsmith hits all of these elements and he's not as good a composer as like Charles Ives or
Uh-huh.
Bernstein or any of these guys? Complete BS. But anyway, for the Westworld thing, that was the challenge, is how do we get to these moments where they're dialogue and have the music feel natural, like that
Yeah.
decrescendo or that that subito piano or
Mhm.
whatever was always supposed to be there.
Mhm.
And I think there's one moment where she's speaking and then she like starts hitting the sunroof with a gun, and I
Yeah, yeah,
thought,
yeah.
I'm gonna Mickey Mouse this. Like that's one thing that we generally try to avoid, is Mickey Mousing, because it's very corny and
Uh-huh.
it doesn't really work anymore unless you're doing like a Star Wars or something like
Mhm.
that, where it's like an insane action movie.
Yeah.
And again, because I was trying to kitchen sink this Westworld thing, because I'd never done a chase sequence like this, I thought, what if I have a cymbal and a bass drum just crashing on the same moment that she's hitting the thing with a
Mhm.
gun, just because it's funny, just because I thought that's really dumb, so I want to do it. And actually, I think musically it kind of works like somewhat well. I was pretty blown away by how okay it is.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I didn't notice that cymbal or bass hit, when she was hitting
great,
the top. So yeah.
great. Then that's good. That's good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, because for me, a lot of the times I'm focused on, the visuals. I feel like a lot of, people are like that too.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then the scoring is just kind of like the icing on the cake. Um,
Some people say
but
that, if the audience doesn't notice the music, then you've done your job as the
yeah.
composer.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Which to that I say, like, BS, because I could watch those. Maybe it's because
Mhm.
I'm a musician and I'm biased, but you watch the Alfred Hitchcock, Bernard Herrmann movies, and I
Mhm.
could hear every note of that score. Or even something recent like Wonder Woman 1984,
Uh-huh.
I could hear every note of Hans Zimmer's score, and that was like what blew me away about the score for that movie. Is like, wow, this score is really loud in the mix.
Mhm.
And I was absolutely blown away and impressed by that, because that's not something that you get these days. Like, generally producers and filmmakers are afraid of music, so they will turn it down to the
I
point
see.
where you don't notice it, or it's just like really underneath everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like the safer play, I would think, if I was a director or producer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Too much wine. I'm I'm drunk, Duke. I'm drunk. I don't what so since we hit Westworld, I don't know, you want to go to like future and so much for an hour.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm not that interesting. And then I guess I like to just hear myself talk like, asshole,
Yeah,
any
yeah, yeah.
asshole who does.
Yeah, yeah. Let's move on to the future section. Before we do that, there's one thing in the
Sure.
past that I remember that I don't know if I'd call it a fond memory, but I think it's a good memory. After freshman year, after probably most of the football games or maybe every football game, um, you would say, "I'm gonna go home and sleep with my wife," and at the at the time, I had no idea where that was from. Like, I knew it was some reference to something, and so luckily we had the internet, and I did some research, and it was from the Clue movie. So I was
Yeah.
like, all right, let me find where this reference is from. So I ended up watching the Clue movie. I love murder mysteries. They're great.
Great.
And I enjoyed it, and I'm going through the movie and I'm like, where is this line from? And it's not until the very end, I think.
Literally the last
Literally the
thing
last.
Michael McKean says in
Yeah.
the movie.
I was like, oh, there it is. Yeah.
Which I think Julian and I both had a fondness for Clue.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember Julian, if we ever see him again, he does a great impression of Eileen Brennan in that
Mhm.
movie, where he just like flames, flames, burning, burning. Like he does such a good Eileen Brennan. I remember even
Mhm.
thinking at the time, wow, that's really good.
That's pretty good. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, when we eventually meet again,
Mhm.
I will have to ask Julian to do his Eileen Brennan impression.
Yes,
Because
yeah.
I still remember when he did it thinking,
Mhm.
wow, this guy is like, that's spot on. But yeah, that came from Clue. Quite loved. I love that movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, in high school, and I thought it was so weird that Julian had seen it. So I thought, here's this
Mhm.
weird kind of like cult murder mystery
Yeah, yeah.
movie that's like a cult favorite. And then when Julian was like, "Oh yeah, I've seen Clue," I thought, "Whoa, I'm not alone."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just thought it was so jarring at the time. I was like, what the hell are you guys talking about?" But
I
yeah,
go
he's
home and
gonna
sleep with my wife.
yeah. But he's gonna be on next week's episode. So
Oh,
maybe I'll bring
great.
that up.
Fantastic. Yeah, ask him
Yeah.
to do his Eileen Brennan impression.
Cool.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, let's talk about the future. So I have goals. Do you have any short term, long term, kind of
Um,
medium in terms of
you
length?
know, it's been such an interesting year this past year to kind of
Yeah.
stop and reflect and think about, where I am in my life. Um, one thing that I was always really hard on myself about is, when I moved out here, I became incredibly obsessed with Bernard Herrmann,
Mhm.
who is I mentioned him earlier, composer of um he did a couple movies with Hitchcock, like the most famous Hitchcock films, Psycho, Vertigo, Man Who Knew Too Much. Um Herman was such an interesting character, and by the time that he was our age, he was like already a professional conductor.
Uh-huh.
He was like, he came up in radio at CBS, and then I think about the guys who I admire, like in terms of directors, Orson Welles, did Citizen Kane when he was in his mid 20s. Brian Wilson did Pet Sounds by the time he was 23. It's so hard, and I look at my life and I think to myself, "Oh my god, I've done nothing of that nature."
Yeah.
Like it's so hard to not, when you're pursuing a creative art as a career, it's so hard to not compare yourself to the people that you admire and that you
Yeah.
love. And again, as I'd mentioned earlier, everybody gets into the business differently. Someone else that I haven't mentioned yet, who's been an incredibly important person in my life, is Justin Hurwitz. As
Mhm.
when I moved out here to LA, Justin is a great composer, and he did the score for. He does the music for Damien Chazelle's movies.
Mhm.
So he did the music for all four of the movies that Damien's directed. He did this musical called Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, Whiplash, La La Land,
Mhm.
for which he won 2 Oscars, and First Man. And I literally, I had 2 jobs at one point. I was working at Barnes and Noble, and Justin came in, and I struck up a conversation with him because I
Mhm.
was a big fan of his Whiplash score, and we became friends. And Justin has been a great supporter and a source of information, on film scoring, um, and he's kind of helped put my head in a good space to be in terms of career goals and things like that,
Mhm.
um and I worked at the theater for 4 years, and then obviously because movie theater shut down because of the pandemic, we all got
Yep.
laid off. A lot of us got laid off in March, which I think ultimately was for the better, because talk about a toxic work environment. Like, I was doing horrible things there, other people were doing horrible things there.
Uh-huh. Like things you shouldn't
I was just,
mention.
because we were doing screenings with guests,
Mhm.
and it's ultimately entertainment, egos get in the way.
Yeah.
And much like every job I've ever had, and I'm not afraid to say this, even though I'm going to disseminate this all over my social media, and people who worked there will have access to this.
Yeah, yeah.
Much like every job I've ever had, except the job I have now, the day job that I have now, the manager or general manager, greatly unqualified for the position that they're in.
Uh-huh.
And the theater just, because of the egos involved and you're like in creative, it just became difficult and it was incredibly stressful. And I'm happy to no longer be in that environment. And I
Mhm.
think even, there's some big changes happening over there, like Netflix bought the Egyptian, stuff like that.
Oh,
Even I think if like my old job got offered back, I wouldn't right now, I wouldn't go back because it was just like it was too much trouble and it was too stressful. And I didn't like dealing with, I had ideas that I wanted to
mhm.
do and nobody would listen to you because, they're so busy trying to push their own agenda and,
Right.
fuck them. But anyway, not
Yeah,
bitter at all.
ego. I think regarding ego, that's one of the things that kept me in check. Like I learned pretty early on as being the successor to Julian that hey, my job as a drum major is, XYZ. It's very easy to get the power, get to your head and kind of
If
do
you're gonna
whatever you
do
want.
if you're going to go into a creative art as a
Mhm.
career, and this sort of plays into what I was talking about earlier,
Mhm.
where right, the flute player from Berkeley who had dropped out. Um, you know, you have to have a little bit of an ego
Yeah.
because you have to be comfortable enough in your own skin that you can tell yourself, I can go into this situation and do well. Um, and if it's like, I'm not talking about becoming like William Friedkin, where your ego is so enormous, like he was
Mhm.
the director who did The Exorcist. Your ego is so huge that you can do no wrong and you're going to do this
Yeah.
massive, thing that you're going to be remembered for. And then it ends up being a massive disaster
Yeah.
that it literally destroys your career.
Yeah.
Um, Not that level, but I think it's important, and that's why it's important to surround yourself with peers who will keep you in check, who
Yeah.
will challenge you and who will tell you, I think this is a good idea. I think this is a bad idea. And, that support system is unbelievably important to have.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of goals, Christopher Young told me, you got to be realistic. Like I told him
Mhm.
I was planning to move out here and I had no prospects for a job. And he was like, oh my God, you can't do that. He's like, you
Yeah.
just can't, you're never going to survive out here. He's like, it's cutthroat, it's hard. Um, you can't not have something that will reliably put money in your bank account
Mhm.
regularly. Like you have to have something. Um, and that was like a wake up call, right, from Chris. And that's why I've been holding down like a day job in the meantime, because
Mhm.
hopefully, the goal is, of course, to have, composing be my job full time.
Right.
So I would, at this point, with my conversations through Justin and getting to know, his side of the business and his experience, it's like I would like to hopefully, but because COVID has kind of slowed everything down and, we're basically going to lose 2 years. Maybe if I can swing it, at some point in the next year, I would like to get, even if it's a dead end job, preparing parts, like
Uh-huh.
taping parts together. I'd like to do that. Like if I'm going to have a dead end job, I would rather have a dead end job in the industry than not. So it's
Right.
like,
Yeah, true.
having the confidence to put myself out there, but that's been my biggest thing. Is like I'm not confident enough in my skills as an orchestrator, as a composer to reach out to other composers and tell them, hey, if you're looking for an assistant, I would love to do that
Mhm.
job. Because this another thing about the creative arts is, again, you have to know people and you have to get to know people and become friends with people, and
Yeah.
ultimately they're going to be your biggest resource. That's how I got that commercial,
Mhm.
which I also sent you a link to. Is
Yeah, well,
again, Justin Hurwitz is like, hey, this production reached out to me. They need to find somebody to, do this ad, which is literally like, we shot for 45 minutes, but the
oh,
commercial ended up being like, blink
30
and you'll
seconds.
miss me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's like
it's
30
like,
seconds, yeah.
they just needed somebody to conduct the orchestra to get
Yeah.
the footage that they
Mhm.
needed. I don't know who ended up doing the music for that commercial, but
Mhm.
Justin reached out and he said, hey, I'm helping these people find a somebody who can conduct. Um, somebody who would be capable enough to look convincing. And he said, and the first person I thought of was you, which, I was flattered as hell. And at the same time, it's like, ooh, why me? No shortage of people who would be able to do this. But,
Yeah.
I was incredibly flattered that he did. And I'm glad that he did.
Mhm.
Um, and then literally a month later, COVID shut everything down. Um,
Oh.
so that was kind of like the
Yeah.
promise of maybe this year is going to lead to something, and then it didn't. And I'm just barely starting to be okay with that, but I was so hard on myself because of it. But then talking with Justin and with Chris, they were I'm so lucky to have Chris, Justin, and um, my two kind of sax mentors, Brian Scanlon and Dan Higgins. And then even like James Kenny tell me like, hey, man, this is a bump in the road. Um, and that's it. And I'm so fortunate to have them as part of my support
Mhm.
system, and incredibly lucky to have them as my like support system. And then at home, it's so easy to just kind of crawl into a hole and
Mhm.
be dismissive of yourself. And Stacy reminds me that that's some degree that's okay, but that's not going to be the be all end all. Which again, godsend of a woman.
Mhm.
And that's like so it's my goal, I guess, for the coming year is I want to kind of move to the next level, whatever
Uh-huh.
that'll be, whether it's kind of getting a more produced picture to do, or whether it's finding an assistant position with a working composer.
Mhm.
You know who knows. I'm at for the moment I'm just kind of looking at you know how I can improve and make myself better as a musician, because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it's all a means to an end. Like,
Mhm.
I'm doing a day job right now where I'm like, packing orders at a warehouse, and it's a means to an end.
Right. Yeah.
Um, it's what's going to put money in the bank. It's what's going to allow me to continue to be
Mhm.
creative. Um, and it's that kind of constant reminder to be creative. Whether the thing I'm struggling with right now is, it's the first time that I've had a full time job in my life.
Mhm.
How do I um balance the full-time job and balance creativity? Because
Yeah.
usually 3 days out of the week I'll work 7.5 hours. I'll 40 minutes is my commute to get home, and then usually I'll run 2 or 3 miles, and by that point I'm
There we go.
like, I'm done for the day.
Yeah, yeah.
If I'm good enough, I'll force, if I'm dedicated enough, I'll force myself to sit down and spend the
Mhm.
rest of the evening on the computer, and whether it's doing an online course or orchestration, or lately I've really been into, and by lately I mean the last 2 years, I've really been into Beethoven and
Mhm.
reading up on his life and studying the Beethoven symphonies and the string quartets, or whether that's like dissecting a couple of bars of Beethoven before I go to bed. Or watching, a movie for a
Mhm.
director that I admire. Kind of, I guess right now I'm sort of trying to get by on other people's creativity as opposed to my own, because I'm in a little
Yeah.
bit of a slump. But that's okay, and I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to be okay with it. And then talking with the other directors who I've worked with, who are some of which are great friends, telling me it's that they're experiencing the same thing as well.
Mhm.
And that's comforting to know that we're sort of all, I guess, creative types in the same boat at the moment, because
Yeah.
I am the first to admit that I'm like incredibly hard on myself.
Yeah.
um and I don't see any other way around that, um because that's just who I am as a creator. Like, there's a horrible saying, from Whiplash the movie. There's that quote,
Mhm.
there's no two words in the English language more dangerous than good job. um
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, I'll take good job for what it is, but then at the end of the day, it's like, how could I take that good job and how could I make it a great job? How
Yeah,
could
yeah.
I seek to improve whatever it is? I could give two shits about my day job, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
Like, I don't care. I'm not going to be there a year from now. At least I hope I'm not. As I mentioned, it's a
Mhm.
means to an end, as one of my friends, told me to say to myself.
Right, yeah.
Um, and uh I guess the goal for the moment is just to like make some money, stay afloat. Um, Something that you touched on earlier, Duke, is that school
Yeah.
is not for everybody. Something that I,
Yeah.
I talked about in therapy is, do I want to go back to school and finish my degree? And at the moment, the
Yeah.
answer is no. And that weighed on me so heavily that I
Yeah.
never finished my degree.
Yeah, I say that because
And
my brother he went to community college and he was there for maybe a semester or two, but he just stopped going. I feel like, and this is just from my perspective and what I think he feels, is that I feel like he wasn't going anywhere with it. He didn't have an end
mhm.
goal, so it was like, why do I need to keep doing this? He didn't have.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
my sisters had good jobs that paid the bills. My
Mhm.
relationship with my family now is like better than it ever has been in some regards. Ooh, are you offering me a little drinky winky? Stacy's offering me here a nice little special.
Oh, nice. I also got
Oh, that is good.
I also
What
got
do you have?
some Bundenberg. It's like a sparkling
Oh, never
it's like a
tried that.
sparkly fruit drink. It's pretty
Oh,
good.
looks good. Yeah,
It's they got the ginger ale. It's like
that is good.
it's like the original flavor. But hey, you can go to Target, go to the soda section. They have them.
Okay, I'll have to check
Um,
that out.
yeah.
But anyway, my sisters had jobs
Mhm.
that they held down. They had their AAs. They never transferred. I hope they don't mind me saying. But this weighed on me so heavily, and I was trying to ignore the
Mhm.
fact that more and more people that I knew around me went to school, got a degree in a very specialized field,
Mhm.
and then they don't have jobs in those fields. And I was trying to
Yeah.
tell myself, it's anomalous. That's not the case for everybody. And then I believe early last year, I went to a pre-concert talk.
Uh-huh.
And if I ever meet him again, I'll have to tell him what this did for me in my life. But James Newton Howard, the great film composer who's done the Hunger Games movies, and
Mhm.
he did Signs for M. Night Shyamalan, Unbreakable. He co-composed Batman Begins and The Dark Knight with Hans Zimmer. He was premiering his cello concerto at UCLA at Royce Hall with the LA Chamber Orchestra, and they did a pre-concert talk before the
Mhm.
premiere. Sitting a couple seats away from Hans Zimmer, I was kind of like, oh my god, this is what it's like to be in the presence of of
Yeah.
giants. The shoulders that we stand on. Which is probably why I'm so hard on myself, because it's like I listen to the music I write, and then I go
Mhm.
back to like one bar of Beethoven, and it's like, how could you have an
Yeah.
ego? How could I take myself seriously when the shoulders that we stand on are immense? But anyway,
Yeah.
and James Newton Howard was speaking, and he talked about how he went to USC. And I actually didn't know this, but he never graduated. He never
Mhm.
finished. And he said, much like how I felt, and again, it's all about personal connection, how you connect to art and what art does for you because of that personal connection. He said, when I was going to USC, I knew that in that environment, I would never succeed. So that's why I left. That probably did more for me than so many of the books that I'd read on, kind of like artistic development, or, kind of interpersonal relationships. Not that I'm trying to downplay reading books on,
Mhm.
developing and fostering relationships, but hearing him say that was like, it just felt good. It was kind of like a weight had
Yeah.
been lifted off my shoulders. That I thought, maybe this is okay. School's not for everybody. I'm not trying to downplay not going to college, because I think everyone should have some sort of collegiate experience,
Right.
whether
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go to a JC and you get your AA, or you go to a 4-year school for a couple of years, and whatever. But hearing James Newton Howard say that was kind of
Mhm.
like, it didn't feel good, because ultimately it's like, I wish I had my degree, but it felt comforting to know that
Mhm.
there was somebody else in my shoes who is so far beyond where I am now, that it ultimately did wonders for me. And again, if I ever meet him again, I would love to tell him, like, I can't tell you how much that, meant to
Mhm.
me that you said that. And I personally connected to it. Um,
Yeah,
but I guess
it's like someone who's walked your path, but you've known,
absolutely,
yeah, you know where
absolutely.
they're years ahead of you, so um you know where that's gonna take you. So
Yeah.
that's comforting to hear.
And it's like, so I guess if I'm gonna, because it's been way over an hour, but which is what I was shooting for, because I don't think I'm that interesting. But if I'm gonna wrap this up, I guess for any kind of like, if the bandies are listening, of of that are in high school, it's like, treat your instrument with respect, treat your art
Mhm.
with respect, and that means know even just the smallest bit of history of your instrument or of your craft.
Mhm.
Never stop learning, and kind of like learn to communicate with those around you, because that will do so much. That'll do wonders for you.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You would
I
think
have to admit,
like
you
you
know,
would
you,
think communicating is really easy, but
it's
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 difficult.
not. You communicate with your friends one way, and you
Mhm.
communicate, you know, your parents with a different way. And when I
Yep.
was growing up, I learned that communication with my friends was much easier. So
Mhm.
ultimately, when I had emotional needs that I had to fulfill, I went to my friends before I
Mhm.
went to my parents.
Yeah.
So in some respects, like my friends, became like a tighter family than like my blood relatives.
Mhm.
Um, which I have no problem, admitting, because in many ways I still feel that way to this day. Um, and it's kind of like looking back on it, it's kind of like I'm happy with where I'm at now. Like I'm really happy with where I'm at now. I don't
Mhm.
I don't sort of regret anything that's occurred over the last couple of years. I mean, I'm regretful that we're in this pandemic and the unnecessary like
Yeah.
loss of life. And just looking at the numbers for Ventura County, it's like
Yeah. Or like
especially like
yeah,
South
it's
Oxnard with it's mostly people who don't do jobs that can work from home, that they have to go to
ex
work every day.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like you know the unnecessary damage that this is going to do. And I'm trying not to get political on this, but
Right. Yeah. I agree. It definitely could have been handled better, and I'll just leave it at that.
yeah, it's like this
Yeah.
this happened under the absolute kind of like the worst people possible that could run this have run this. But then
Yeah.
also at the same time, a friend of mine who's a writer
Mhm.
believes that we're in an important moment where this is going to force everybody to kind of stop and reflect
Yeah.
before a great change.
Uh-huh.
And I hope that that is the case for me. I hope that's the case for like everyone around me. I hope that's the case for just kind of, the
Mhm.
world at large, is that going forward, life is going to be very different in a good way. And
Yeah.
I have a dark, dark outlook on humanity. Like I'm a pessimist.
Yeah.
I believe in the worst in people, but I think that this, hopefully will bring that this pandemic, hopefully will bring out some of the best in all of us to kind of look at what works in our lives, what doesn't. The environment that I was working at the theater was very toxic,
Mhm.
part of it created by others, part of it created by like my own ego. So I'm happy to be out of that and to just kind of stop and look at, the past and take what I need to from it and move forward.
Yeah,
And
I guess that's the spirit of post-tsunami is to have that reflection, because COVID has definitely made me like sit down and maybe think about, just life in general, whereas sometimes you don't really think about that stuff when you're like in the crux of your days, I guess.
yeah, you
Um
get so caught up in the
yeah.
day-to-day BS of your life that
Yep.
you lose sight of the best, the big picture,
Mhm.
because your worry is like, what am I going to make for dinner this evening?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's okay. That's nothing to fret over, because you got to eat, you got to be healthy, you got to stay well,
Mhm.
you got to do whatever. So but doing when you told me about doing this podcast, I kind of at first I was like, I'm gonna not do this because like
Uh-huh.
I don't want to, but then I'm kind of glad that I did, because
Mhm.
that's allowed me to reflect on my time in band, and um what a complete asshole I was unnecessarily. And that again goes to where I think I redirected a lot of my kind of
Mhm.
like that energy is directed toward the wrong places, because of course I can look back on now it's so easy to look back and say, I wish I would have redirected a lot of that intense energy into actually, doing lessons or
Mhm.
furthering my education or bettering myself or being a better academic, like, Julian, Vince, Samantha
Mhm.
Clete, further outside the circle, like Ryan Gonzalez. Like, these are all people that I admire
Mhm.
endlessly because of their abilities to be a good academic and a good student and also just great people. And looking at that and saying, like, I could never be like that for one reason or another, but, kind of accepting that for what it is and
Mhm.
then, just moving forward. Because moving forward, because there are, things that I want to do with my life and, you know, experiences that I want to have like this. Like, I'm glad that, you and I have been able to sit down and have
Yeah.
this, this talk. And I hope that, in the future, we'll be able to continue this, um, in person, hopefully with like Angel or Andrew or
Yeah, for
Paul or
sure.
any of those, Alexis, any of those great,
Mhm.
kind of people that came into my life at the right moment and,
Mhm.
are now off doing great things with their lives.
Mhm.
But I guess I don't know. I'm happy with where things are at. Of course, things could always be better,
Right. Yeah, yeah.
but I guess right now I'm sort of in a place where I'm okay with
Mhm.
it all. It might change next week, but that's the beauty of life is its unpredictability, I think.
Yep. Yeah. One of the questions that I put down, like, what do you what's the most like idealistic like version of yourself? Like, what do you think is like the best version of
Mm.
yourself? What does that look like?
I want to have a good career. I want to
Mhm.
be able to support myself.
Mhm.
I want to be able to support myself. Um, hopefully doing something that I love. Hopefully it's composing and writing music and being creative
Mhm.
because that to me has felt like the biggest calling. Um, but basically just being able to support myself, like whatever that may be. You have these romanticized dreams about, moving to like at least I
Mhm.
did about like moving to the big city. Like I'd always wanted to move to LA. I loved LA, even though it's a gutter. Um, it's an absolute trash heap of a city, but I've learned to kind of find beauty within those heaps.
Mhm.
Um, I guess the idealized version of myself is being able to just kind of like, support myself and being a good partner to the people or to Stacy and to, a good friend or what have you to the people that I love. Uh and just kind of working. I know,
Mhm.
again, another thing about being out here in LA is that you quickly learn to decipher who loves to talk about making movies as
Mhm.
opposed to who actually goes out and makes movies or has the desire to go out and make movies. And
Mhm.
that's something that I begun to notice in Ventura County too, is that like, when I was still living in Oxnard, there were people who I talked to who were like, oh yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that. And it's like, okay, it's great to talk about it, but what are you doing to actually do it?
Yeah, gotta have that
I'm
action.
very I'm very attracted to doers. And and again, there's a couple of different types of doers that I've met out here, and some people love what comes at the end,
Mhm.
particularly like specifically pertaining to my field of the arts. They love the premieres and going to parties and
Yeah, the results. Yeah.
interacting inside. They love the results, and that's great, but
Mhm.
I hate the results, man. I don't like going to parties. I don't like being around that environment. I love my idea of just kind of like a great day would be to be at my
Mhm.
sequencer in Logic
Yeah.
for like 8 hours and, working on music cues and then going out to run a couple miles at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And then just spend the rest of the night, either watching a movie or
Mhm.
kind of, like dissecting a Beethoven score or something by John Williams. And that's sort of my idealized version of it.
Mhm.
Of course the giant house would be great, but I
Yeah.
just would love to work. I would love to do the work. I want to do the
Mhm.
work. I love doing the work. To me, the work is the best aspect of it. The
Yeah.
actual nitty gritty of how you make these. Like if somebody puts a picture in front of you,
Mhm.
it's like how do you set music to this?
Yeah.
That's why I was attracted to it in the first place. Is like I love the marriage of like visuals and music,
Mhm.
and trying to make that work.
Mhm.
Basically, long-winded answer for your question is just kind of like I just want to do the work,
Mhm.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sort of like that. I think with the results, like let's say I'm building an app and we're gonna launch it, the launch would scare the crap out of me because I've worked
Yeah,
hours and hours on end, developing, whatever and putting it together. I love the building process, but the launching process gives me a lot of anxiety because I think to myself, what if this part breaks? What if I didn't test it enough? Because testing is a big part of our field. There are like dedicated rules for it.
and has time between like let's say your most recent launch and your
Yeah.
first launch, has that feeling around the launch changed, or is it just kind of like, oh, I remember this from the last one? Is it just sort of stayed the
Yeah.
same? Like, do you feel differently from the first one as opposed to the most recent one?
I think it depends on the scope of the
Mhm.
project. If the audience, so the apps that I make, it's a pretty limited audience because
Okay,
the apps are all enterprise apps, so they're mainly used by other employees and they never see the light of day in the public. Um,
sure.
which is fine, but it kind of sucks because if the app breaks, then it probably breaks some new business process that they're trying to implement. Um, but for me, it's my job's more like I'm building the tools for other people to use, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm not necessarily creating the machine. I'm building like the wrenches and the screwdrivers to make the machines.
Mhm.
Um, so launching it's not it doesn't make me like super anxious because the public's not going to see it. But we are releasing one app that is going to be public facing, and that's going to be a little terrifying for me because my work is going to be out there. Of course, you never like see it, but
Sure.
um, it's being part of that process. And if something goes wrong, um, you get all of like the blunt of that feedback. But if everything
Mhm.
goes right, you usually don't get the recognition, which is fine. But the anxiety for me is like if things break, that's
And I think
yeah,
the anxiety is good, in
yeah,
some of course, it feels
right,
awful, but it's good,
right,
though, I think, in some respects, because that means that you take it seriously.
yes, yep,
You take it seriously, and, it's very important to you, which is,
yeah,
easy to get lost, and it took me a while to realize that.
mhm,
Like, prior to performances, it's like, "Oh, man, I'm nervous," because,
yeah.
you take it seriously, and it means something important to you.
Right, yeah, yeah. That was my big driving band. It's like I don't want to sound like crap, if I'm gonna be part of this concert. I want to, you know, respect, respect the
Right.
concert, respect the piece and the instrument, and give it, at least some effort.
Yeah,
I don't have to be
absolutely.
perfect. um,
Right. Um, so that's my goal, I guess. This is just kind
mhm,
of the next step is to just, you know, is to actually find some kind of a position in the field of scoring,
mhm,
whether it's literally just taping parts, two pages together on a part, or it's something else. I would actually like to get out of my comfort zone a little bit and maybe reach
mhm.
out to composers and see where that goes.
Do
Yeah.
composers collaborate a lot, or is it like a one person show most of the time for each
They
film?
can. Usually the job is so involved that there's not really a lot of, outreach to other composers. Like I
Uh-huh.
mentioned earlier, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight were scored by James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer.
Mhm,
But generally, they have it's interesting that, one person can score a movie. Like
mhm.
for small projects and shorts and things like I've been doing, I've been able to handle the brunt of the work. But if I
Uh-huh.
landed like a feature film that
Yeah.
had a real budget, I would
Uh-huh.
have to hire like an orchestrator who to be my right hand, basically to sort of help me with a lot
Oh,
of
I
the
see.
tasks,
Yeah, yeah.
just because of the time involved,
Mhm,
and usually the time is what leads to other people taking on certain aspects of the job.
mhm,
You open a string track in Logic that has all of the string sounds preloaded in one track, so that if you reach the low end of the keyboard, it's like, the cello and the basses, and then if you reach to the upper end of the keyboard, it's like, violins. So you have one string section across one track as opposed to preloading individual instruments. You compose that way to save time, and then you send it to the orchestrator, and the
Mhm.
orchestrator has to decode it and separate all of those parts so that eventually the musicians will get it on the stand, and it's like a bass part, a cello part, a viola part,
Mhm.
violin 1 and 2. And that's where, that division of work begins to come up, because again, everyone, it's like, the time
Mhm.
crunch. That's the biggest thing
Yeah.
between, with technology now, is because of technology, the time crunch has become that much tighter, and
Yeah.
the turnaround has, become that much sooner. So that's where the kind of division of work has to come in. So usually when you see a composer's name in the credits on a film
Mhm.
score, that usually means they were the music director. If you want to
Yeah.
think of it that way, they were the
Uh-huh.
ones who were the creative and came up with the ideas, but they themselves eventually also had to divide the work up into their team.
I see.
Um,
So there's a whole team backing, that
there's a
person's
whole
work.
team backing that person's work. Behind every Marco Beltrami, you have a
Mhm.
Buck Sanders. All the great John Williams film scores from the 70s and
Mhm.
80s were orchestrated by Herbert Spencer. Um, that doesn't mean John Williams didn't do any of the work. Quite the contrary, actually. He has to write so quickly
Mhm.
that the composer has to write so fast that he doesn't have enough time to start to do the detail work. And the detail work has to be divided up amongst, orchestrators, and orchestrators themselves are, the unsung heroes, I think, of the film scoring world. And I admire what they do, and I respect what they do a lot, and it's impressive. And if I can find a place at some point in one of those teams, and that would be fantastic.
Mhm.
But you know, who knows? Who knows where we'll go this year? I'm happy to just be alive right now, to just be
Oh,
alive
yeah,
and to
yeah,
be
for
able to
sure.
enjoy.
Mhm.
I'm happy to have made it through 2020, not getting sick, knock on wood.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
And to be still in contact with people that I love and that I admire, and to get to do stuff like this, very introspective
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
'Cause I knew that looking back at myself in high school meant having to kind of look at a lot of my assholey behaviors.
Yeah.
And I didn't want, and thus partially the alcohol. It's like this will soften the blow and also
Yeah,
open
yeah.
me up to be able to, discuss certain like behaviors or
Mhm.
whatever that I'm not proud of.
Mhm.
Um, but I have to acknowledge that I did them. I'm sorry for them, and hopefully I'll learn, something about those, and kind of use that to move forward and to hopefully be a better person.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I hit everything that I wanted to talk to. Anything else, or shall we wrap up?
Only other things I could think of are, um, you know, I'm not sure how many, bandies that are still in high school are going to watch this, but even if you're not going to do this as a career, take a couple lessons, because that'll help you as a person. It'll help you as an artist.
Mhm.
It's, a great way to just also connect with somebody who is
Yeah.
an expert on your instrument.
Yeah.
It'll teach
What
you about life.
what kind of lessons? Just with the instrument or music theory?
It could be, if music theory is your thing, it could be music theory. If
Mhm.
you love playing the flute or the clarinet or the tuba, take those lessons.
Mhm.
Because it'll teach you about the instrument, it'll teach you about yourself, it'll teach you, kind of, even if it's just one lesson a month,
Yeah.
if you don't take it seriously, that'll give you some things to focus on and to think about. Learn learn how to fill out a W-2. That's something that they don't teach you in high school, that is like, why is this not taught in
Yeah.
public schools? Learn how to fill out your tax forms and what
Yep.
everything means, and when you claim one dependent versus zero dependence
Mhm.
versus two dependents, If you have multiple jobs, learn, how to fill
Mhm.
that stuff out. Cause oh my God, I got reamed, man, when I got 2 jobs. When I had two
Oh
jobs,
man.
I got reamed on my taxes.
Uh-huh.
And it was one of those things that are like, why is this not taught like in public schools? So learn to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Uh,
that's something that I would add to the high school requirement. I would maybe take out some of the math and put in personal finance. Um, things with
economics.
yeah, we
I
can
guess
even
is
take out
supposed to cover
economics.
that,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's like
it's economics is too broad, I would
forget
think.
that.
Yeah.
Forget that shit. You don't need to know how the stock market works.
Yeah.
Learn like when you get paid $500 every 2 weeks. Learn how to budget that. I
Yep.
still don't know how to do that. And that screws me every single time I get paid in terms
Mhm.
of like, coming to my bills or whatever. Learn how to fill out tax forms, learn how
Yep.
to like budget now so that it's not a problem later. Learn how your credit works.
Yep.
Um, and then also I think just find like the joy in what you're doing at the moment.
Mhm.
Because that was looking back on it, the joy that I experienced from band in high school, from my friendships in high school, from the kind of um, academic fulfillment I got in high school, like when I would
Mhm.
do well in classes. That joy has never compared to what I experience now. It's like on a different
Yeah.
level. Um, just kind of find the happiness in what you're doing and be willing to learn, be willing to, open yourself up to new ideas. I think we're like in a constantly changing world socially,
Right. Yeah, yeah.
uh, personally, professionally,
Mhm.
economically, like so much more people are working at home, or working from home now than they were even like a year ago.
Yeah, yeah, my
Um,
general manager is totally against it, but, now that we're forced in this position, it's like, "Oh, maybe this isn't too bad,"
such an
that kinda
it's
thing.
an ever changing world, and I think
Yeah.
being able to adapt and to accept things like that. Like I think at work the other day I was talking with somebody about, this is such a heavy topic which
Mhm.
I will not get into, um like gender identity, because this guy
Yeah.
was like, I just don't get it. And it's like, that's
No.
fine that you don't get it, but just be open to the fact that other people are questioning it. And
Yeah.
I think that's good, because that means that, as people, we're moving forward and we're not
Mhm.
stuck with the same ideas that we have been for the last thousands of years. And I
Right.
think, relating to kind of art and, music and ourselves personally, opening ourselves up to those kinds of ideas means that we're going to grow as human beings. Uh, and hopefully, whether you accept it or not, that's that's ultimately your kind of issue. But I think just be open to the fact that those ideas exist and that they are going to be part of society. And I'm so lost as to where I am with this now, because that might be the alcohol talking.
Oh.
But basically, you know keep an open mind, in terms of it. That's the one thing I kind of wish I could have done in high school. That's the one thing I wish I could have done, that I could do more now. But my whatever habits are so built into me now that I'm trying to work on expanding it. But it's just like, be open to different things and to different ideas, and that ultimately that's going to take you to places that you yourself could never get to.
Mhm.
And with that, I say,
Yep. Cheers.
I cheers. I drink to your health and to your longevity, and I drink to the memory of Ludwig van Beethoven.
Cool, as we wrap up, do you wanna give any shout outs to anyone?
I
And where
want to give
people
a
can find
shout
you?
out. I want to give a shout out to, first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to my girlfriend Stacy, who is kind of more like my wife at this point. I love her to death. Like I really think I would not be here had it not been for her. And she saw something in some weird bullshit that we connected over a television show that that it has become such a weird menial thing in
Mhm.
our lives, but ultimately that was like the key to connecting in a
Yeah.
way that I'd never connected with anybody before. And I am incredibly grateful and thankful for that every single day, even though I know I don't mention it nearly enough. I want to give a shout out to, I guess, everybody else in my graduating class. Like whenever I see Sam or Julian or Vince,
Mhm.
Julian's off kind of, helping foster young minds, and
Yep.
he's doing something that I can never do. I have so much admiration for that. And to, people who um were just like who I wanted to be, like Sam, Plete, Vince, um, Angel Aragon, Andrew Orozco. I think about all these people, and watching this podcast as in the episodes past,
Mhm.
Patty, like seeing where they are in their lives, Alexis, who I've talked to here and there, and just being like, being so excited and so happy to see where they are
Mhm.
in their lives. You, Duke, as well, hearing about your experiences in the marching band at Cal Poly,
Oh, yeah,
uh,
yeah. It's it's
and
been a
things like
lot of
that.
fun. I've had a lot of fun.
I'm just so happy to see how you've all grown as individuals and grown as human beings,
Mhm.
and still keep in contact with each other, and help each other.
Yeah.
It's been incredibly, kind
Mhm.
of like satisfying in a way that I never thought
Mhm.
that it would be, which I guess was like a very selfish thing. It's like, once you leave this behind,
Mhm.
it's behind. But part of the reason why I wanted to do this, I guess, is because, I still think about all those things, and I think about all those people, and, the relationships that we
Mhm.
had and how good they were at that time, and wanting to relive them for a little bit. So, it's great. Also, this is the most that you and I have ever
Probably,
spoken to
yeah.
each other. So,
Probably,
I
yeah.
hope that when we're vaccinated, we could continue this in person.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh
that'd be sweet.
Absolutely. So, I thank you for the opportunity to do this, to
Yeah,
be able
yeah.
to get to do this and to reflect and on myself and those around me, and to,
Mhm.
look at my mistakes and accept those mistakes, and to hopefully, to grow
Uh-huh.
from all those experiences.
Yeah, you're welcome, Eduardo. It was it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and I I love seeing how people are in life now. Like that's I don't know, that might be the driving force of the podcast, but I always like having band involved in my life in some way, and this is sort of like a twisted way to get band still involved.
I
Um,
think band was so, for those of us who, because for some people it's just a class, and
yeah, yeah.
you can't help that, if that's how you're going to approach it. But for
Mhm,
those of us who, treated it as a little bit more,
mhm.
I think it's such a keystone as to who we are, um, that its influence on us can't be overstated. And so for that, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank Terrell enough for giving us the opportunity to,
Yes. Yeah.
grow in that way. Um, and just to have the opportunity to be able to do that. It was been absolutely fantastic.
Cool. All right, Eduardo. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Duke, for having me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I'm like, shit faced now, but that's how
It's
I
all
choose
good.
to live my life.
It's all good. I told you this always goes longer than expected.
I know, I
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it's crazy, but here we are. Hopefully, if anybody made it through all the way to the end, I'll give you $5. Please just email me.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
give you $5. I'll Venmo
Sounds
you
good.
$5.
Let's
Yeah,
see. What's the keyword? Uh, like twisted tea. I don't know. Comment twisted tea if you made it to the end.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. All right. Take care, Eduardo.
Thank you, Duke.
Bye.